Nephis changed a lot since the last time Sunny had seen her. Outwardly, she looked almost the same, tall, firm, and strangely distant, as though existing slightly apart from the rest of the world. She was still wearing the Starlight Legion armor, which accentuated the graceful lines of her slender, lithe body. Only now, there was also a white cloak draped over her shoulders, close in color to the pristine metal of the elegant plate armor. Changing Star's silver hair was much longer now, almost reaching her shoulders. Without the short, tomboyish cut, she looked strangely mature and feminine, making Sunny's heart beat a little faster. Her calm gray eyes were as striking as ever. The true changes, however, hid much deeper. Perhaps only a person who knew her as well as Sunny did could notice them. Or perhaps it was precisely because he had come to know her so well that the veil of detached indifference shrouding her true self cracked, revealing the deeper feelings beneath. Nephis seemed to be much more alive now, much more present. Her eyes shined with resolve and determination, radiating an almost infectious feeling of temperate confidence. This was her power, the power of conviction. Sunny shivered under that gaze. Neph was the person he longed to see the most, and at the same time, hoped to never see again. She was the true reason why he had to leave the castle. Stirred awake by this fated meeting, a torrent of memories rose to the surface of his mind. If only he had known at the time. Well, it would not have changed anything, really. 4 months ago, on the night that they had ventured into the cursed sea on a boat made of demons' bones, Sunny was shivering in the wind. After an eternity spent in the cold embrace of darkness, the endless night of their escape was finally drawing its last breaths. He shifted and turned to the east, where a ghostly line of pale lilac appeared over the horizon. Trembling, he licked his lips and said in a raspy voice,
Cassie, it's morning."
After he uttered these words, the last remnant of strength that had kept Sunny going disappeared, and he slumped on the stones, his chest rising heavily and then falling. A new dawn was ready to bathe the desolate hell of the forgotten shore in warm sunlight. They had survived. The 3 sleepers were perched on a giant stone hand that protruded from the black waves, as though held above the lightless abyss by a goddess. Sunny and Cassie were holding each other for warmth, while Nephis was lying in the center of the stone palm, still unconscious. Visible through the gaps in the shattered armor, her ivory skin was pale and listless. Sunny whispered, "We did it." They had escaped the clutches of Soul Devourer, sailed through the cursed darkness, and even lived through a battle with the horrifying Dweller of the Depths. By some miracle, Sunny couldn't quite believe that they had actually managed to pull their daring escape off. From the moment he had learned about the enthrallment hex put onto their minds by the ancient fiend, he felt that the chances of ever saving themselves from the gluttonous evil tree were more than slim. Perhaps because it had taken away his most dangerous and tested weapon, his mind. And yet, somehow they had succeeded. Utterly exhausted, Sunny closed his eyes and listened to the dark sea as it retreated to hide from the coming sun. Without even noticing it, he slipped into the embrace of sleep. When he awoke, the sun was already high in the sky. Sunny expected to feel crippled now that adrenaline had left his battered body, but to his surprise, he wasn't in even half as much pain as he had anticipated. Blood weave was truly a miraculous attribute to have for someone as prone to disasters as he was. Even his broken finger wasn't hurting that much anymore. Sunny still had to groan while sitting up though. Cassie was sleeping by his side, as drained by the events of the previous night as he was, perhaps even more so. Her delicate face seemed vulnerable and pale, twisted in an anxious frown. Sunny sighed. Nephis had yet to regain her senses. At some time while he slept, the blind girl had used her cloak to cover Changing Star, helping her to preserve some warmth. Neph lay still and motionless, her face drained of all color. Only the quiet sound of her breathing told Sunny that she was still alive. He trembled, remembering the harrowing sight of her mangled flesh restoring itself in the crucible of purifying flame. Unleashing that flame always took a heavy toll on Nephis, bringing her unimaginable pain and suffering. Who knew what price she had paid to pull herself away from the doors of oblivion? He had not even realized before that she could use it to heal herself. Perhaps there was a reason why she had never done so in the past. Only time could tell. Sunny muttered, It's time to assess the situation. Turning away from Changing Star, Sunny looked around, trying to discern their current circumstances. His heart was heavy. If they had survived the attack of the tentacle monster and the ensuing shipwreck only to find themselves stranded in the middle of the cursed sea with no way to continue forward, that would be a truly macabre twist of fate. To the east of them, there was nothing but the empty expanse of the colossal crater. Same thing for the... Sunny froze, noticing a dark line in the distance. That was the western edge of the crater. They had almost crossed it. Feeling a strange excitement grasping his heart, Sunny quickly turned around and looked west. His eyes widened. For a few moments, his head was silent and empty. Then a single thought appeared in it. Sunny breathed, "We were so close." He sat quietly for a long time, forgetting about everything else. A few hours later, Cassie finally woke up. Feeling that he wasn't next to her anymore, she called out his name in a frightened voice. He licked his lips. Sunny replied that he was right there. Cassie sat up and stretched her hand out, finding his shoulder. Cassie asked, "Why? Why do you sound so strange?" Sunny blinked, then slowly turned his head to look at the blind girl. A tentative smile found its way onto his face. Sunny said, "Cassie, we found it. We have found that city you saw." In the end, Nephis had remained unconscious for 2 whole days. Sunny was really starting to worry about her, but then, on the 3rd day, Changing Star had finally come back to her sense. At the time, he was sitting on top of the giant hand's index finger, staring west with a warm, excited feeling in his heart. They did it. They were finally going to go home. Sunny couldn't wait to return to the real world. He didn't even care about becoming an awakened and the corresponding leap in power and status that much anymore. All he cared about was his soft bed, mountains of delicious food, and limitless hot showers. Sunny lowered his head and glanced at Nephis, trying to determine if there was anything wrong with her. In the webtoons, one of the characters was bound to suffer from something like amnesia right before things were about to take a turn for the better. But Changing Star seemed to be fine. She was still the same Neph he had known, tall, firm, and strangely distant, as though there was an invisible barrier separating her from the rest of the world. When the gaze of her striking gray eyes fell on him, Sunny felt his heart beating a little faster. He smiled. Sunny breathed a sigh of relief and thanked the gods. Nephis frowned, lowered her head, and then asked in a flat tone. Nephis asked, "Why are you smiling?" Realizing that he was grinning from ear to ear like a fool, Sunny blinked, then tried to shrug with false indifference. Sunny muttered frantically about aborting and diverting her attention, then told her to look behind her. The sight of what lay in the west was one of the reasons for his good mood, so it wasn't that much of a stretch. Neph stared at him for a few moments, then sighed and turned around. Behind her, a tall city wall built of gray polished stone towered above the slopes of the colossal crater. That wall was a sign that all their suffering was not in vain, and that all their dreams were about to come true. It was hope. If you have a friend who would love this story, share this episode with them tonight. Now let us see what waits beyond that wall. Soon after Nephis had finally come back to her senses, they prepared to leave the shelter of the giant stone hand. The morning had just begun, so there was plenty of time to cross the remaining distance and climb out of the deep and vast crater. If all was going to go well, they would meet the next sunset on top of the tall wall of the mysterious city. Of course, numerous things could go wrong between now and then. But, for some reason, Sunny felt optimistic. This was a rare moment for his cynical, paranoid heart. Just like before, Sunny and Neph took turns climbing down a few dozen meters and lowering Cassie to one another with the help of the golden rope. However, they had grown considerably stronger since the last time they had to do it. Sunny remembered how tiresome it was to descend from the giant knight's statue in that way and chuckled. Now, he felt as though he could do it 3 times in a row and considerably faster, too. Even though he had spent the last few days in an endless nightmare and brought his body to the point where it was about to shut down, now, there was nothing but resilient strength filling his muscles. These 2 months that they had spent in the perilous hell of the Crimson Labyrinth, constantly fighting for their lives and slaying monsters that no sleeper should ever face one after another, had made all three of them much more powerful. Sunny doubted that a lot of Awakened had ever gone through this ruthless of an initiation and lived to tell the tale. Once he returned to the real world, he would most likely be considered one of the elite representatives of the current generation. Sunny muttered, "That might actually be a problem." Well, he could always blame everything on Nephis. She was already close to being a mythical existence. The last daughter of the legendary Immortal Flame clan, one of the few Awakened in history who had managed to receive a true name in the first nightmare, the top student in her batch of sleepers in the academy, and so on. People would easily believe that a prodigy like her had been able, and willing, to carry two pathetic weaklings on her back all the way to the gateway. Sunny just had to choose his words carefully when describing the events leading up to their triumphant return. Luckily, in that regard, he was a master. Entertaining himself with such thoughts, he didn't even notice the flow of time. Soon they were already approaching the ground. Just before jumping into the soft black mud, Nephis looked at Sunny and said, Nephis told him to stay vigilant. She didn't have to remind him. Sunny knew that the last stretch was often the most dangerous. Mostly because it was natural for people to allow themselves to relax in these moments, falsely believing that the worst was already behind them. Numerous Awakened perished tragically with their goal already in sight. He wasn't planning on becoming one of them. Sunny carefully lowered Cassie down, watched as Neph helped her step out of the rope loop, and jumped down. He landed on the ground in a nimble roll, immediately jumped to his feet and outstretched one hand, ready to summon the Midnight Shard at a moment's notice. However, nothing was trying to kill them. Sunny and Nephis exchanged tense looks and then slowly walked forward. With each minute, the distant gray wall was growing closer. At some point, Sunny gestured for Changing Star to stop and turned around, curious to take a look at the statue whose hand had saved them from drowning in the dark depths of the cursed sea. Out there on the slope of the colossal crater, slightly tilted to the side, a giant statue of a slender woman dressed in a light flowing robe towered over the black mud. She was lovely and graceful, with a slim waist and delicate arms outstretched to the skies as though trying to embrace them. At least that was how she had looked once a long time ago. Now, one of the arms was broken off, with only its shoulder remaining in place. Luckily, the other one was still there, and had served as a safe haven for the three sleepers in their moment of desperate need. Just as Sunny expected, there were 7 shining stars carved into the stone surface of her robe. What piqued his curiosity the most, though, was the fact that just like the giant knight, the graceful woman seemed to be missing her head. Once again, Sunny wondered if these stone titans were created without faces to begin with, or if something had beheaded them much later in a fit of destructive rage. 7 severed heads guarding 7 seals, he thought, remembering Cassie's frightening vision. The mystery of that vision was nothing short of tantalizing. However, it seemed as though it was destined to remain unsolved. Sunny doubted that he would ever come back to this cursed place after returning to the real world. There were many regions in the dream realm, and almost every one of them was far better than the hellish Forgotten Shore. Sunny snapped, "To hell with all this crap." Sending silent gratitude to the statue that had saved their lives, Sunny turned around and headed west. As they approached the section of the slope that was almost vertical, something dangerous finally happened. Just as Sunny was about to step on a wide stone buried in the mud, the stone suddenly shifted and rolled to the side. A terrible roar resounded across the vast emptiness of the colossal crater, making him shiver in fright, fearing that something was crawling from under the soil. Sunny jumped back and summoned his sword. To his side, Nephis was doing the same, while Cassie swiftly stepped back to not be in the way. However, there was nothing moving in the mud. No giant beast rose from it to feast on their flesh. No horrifying abomination had extended its limbs to pull them underground into its maw. Then, what made that terrible roar? Just as Sunny was trying to understand what was happening, a sharp pain suddenly pierced his right leg. Looking down, he saw. The damn stone was chomping on his shin. The stone, which turned out to be a bizarre nightmare creature, revealed a mouth full of long, sharp teeth on its surface. It awkwardly rolled a couple of times to reach Sunny and then tried to dig its fangs into his soft flesh. It might have bitten Sunny's leg clean off, but luckily, the leather boot of the puppeteer's shroud turned out to be too tough for the stone's jaws, so it was just munching on the leather in powerless resentment. The situation was painful, but not at all dangerous. Sunny stared at the stone, then raised his head and glanced at Nephis in bewilderment. Her expression was as indifferent as always, but after all the time they had spent together, he was able to recognize the similar kind of amusement written clearly on her face. Sunny strained his muscles, raised the trapped leg into the air and shook it a couple of times, trying to send the stupid stone flying. However, the weird monster was really stubborn. With another thunderous roar, it doubled its attempts to gnaw on Sunny's shin, its stone teeth on the verge of shattering from all the pressure exerted on them. Sunny grumbled, "What a pathetic thing. The only hope of killing me it has is if I die from annoyance," and then muttered, "I guess there are losers even among their kind, eh?" Shaking his head, Sunny allowed the shadow to wrap itself around the midnight shard and brought the tip of the blade down on the hungry stone with all the strength he had. The takai was met with some resistance, but managed to pierce and shatter the monster's stone body in the end. The bizarre creature died while still trying to take a bite out of Sunny, defiant till the very end. As the shattered remains of the stone fell into the mud, the voice of the spell whispered,
"You have slain an awakened monster, rolling stone. Your shadow grows stronger, you have."
Seeing a strange expression on Sunny's face, Nephis asked what was wrong. He looked at her and blinked a couple of times. Sunny muttered, "I just received a memory." Changing Star raised her eyebrow and said in an uplifted tone, Nephis said, "That is great. What type of memory?" Sunny scratched his head, hesitated, and then answered. Sunny answered, "It's a rock, an ordinary rock." Soon they were standing beneath the impregnable stone walls of the mysterious city. Behind them, the great chasm of the vast crater stretched to the horizon. Somewhere ahead, the lone human citadel in this loathsome region of the dream realm awaited. It promised to deliver them from this dark place and bring them home. Sunny really couldn't wait to be finally done with this nightmare. The city wall was built from massive slabs of gray granite, still wet from the cold touch of the cursed sea. The ancient weathered stones looked almost black. Despite the thousands of years that passed since the mysterious builders of the wall had disappeared into the fog of time, it still looked monumental and unassailable. The joints between the granite slabs were barely wide enough to insert a narrow blade. Looking up, Sunny tried to guess the height of the wall. It had to be 60 meters tall, at least, twice as high as the awakened Academy defense barrier, which was constructed with the help of both modern technology and various aspect abilities. For a few moments, he wondered about the people who had erected this wall, the city behind it, and the giant statues that still stood lonesomely on the desolate shores of this cursed land. Their creations had withstood the onslaught of darkness and time, but the creators were gone. Who had they been? What terrible fate had befallen the citizens of the ruined city? But then Sunny angrily shook his head. These mysteries had nothing to do with him anymore. He was going home, never to return to this awful pit of horror and despair. Let someone else solve them. After a short rest, they decided that it would be easier to climb the wall instead of circling it in search of an entrance. Even if they were to find a gate, there was no guarantee that it would be open. Climbing the wet granite was not an easy task, but they somehow managed. When there was nothing to use as a hold, Sunny and Nephis resorted to using their swords by inserting them into the joints between the slabs. A few unpleasant cuts later, they found the right rhythm and made quick progress. Enhanced by the consumed soul shards and shadow fragments, as well as the ruthless training regimen of the never-ending battle for survival, their bodies were full of strength and endurance. Both of them were at the peak of human physical ability. Pretty soon, they had reached the top of the massive wall and climbed over its edge. Without even needing to catch his breath, Sunny hungrily crawled forward, jumped to his feet, and gazed down. In the ensuing silence, he could hear the sound of the golden rope scratching against stone. However, his heart was beating louder. Soon Nephis and Cassie joined him. The blind girl grasped his shoulder and asked, her voice bright and full of hope. Cassie asked, "Sonny, what do you see?" He licked his lips. Beneath them, an expansive city lay in ruins. The beautiful stone buildings were broken and shattered, many of them turned into mere piles of rubble. There were no people walking along the wide streets, no clamor of voices to drive away the silence. Under the cold gray sky, the ruined city looked dead and mournful. It was impossible to say what terrible disaster had happened here, but it was clear that it was not natural. Many of the collapsed houses were blackened by fire, with claw marks cut into the still-standing fragments of walls. Here and there, monstrous bones of ancient horrors protruded from the ground, telling tales of desperate battles that must have taken place on these streets once, a long time ago. Looking closer, Sonny felt cold sweat running down his back. There were strange shapes moving through the rubble, and even more hiding in the shadows. Seeing them filled him with an icy sense of dread. The ruined city was teeming with nightmare creatures. Sonny described, "There is a vast, ruined city built of weathered stone, and there are numerous monsters wandering its streets, just like you said there would be." The tall city wall they were standing on was as wide as a road. It stretched endlessly in both directions, enclosing the vast ruins into a strangely perfect circle. Every so often, there were towers built into its impenetrable granite body, serving as bastions against potential enemies. Who would have thought that one day this great barrier would serve not to repel the horrible monsters, but to keep the true horrors imprisoned inside? But Sonny wasn't that interested in the wall. He wasn't even too interested in the monsters. Instead, his eyes were drawn to the tall hill towering above the ruins. On that hill, Sonny described, there is a magnificent castle standing on a hill in the middle of the ruins. It looks like something out of a legend. Its walls are built from radiant white stone with tall towers and majestic spires piercing the sky. It stands above the city like a symbol of hope. The only thing in this hell that seems to be untouched by the darkness and a wide smile appeared on Cassie's face. Cassie exclaimed, "Yes, this is the castle I saw." However, Sonny didn't hear her. Just as he was describing the splendor of the bright castle to the blind girl, his gaze accidentally slid behind it. Now, all he could see was the dark silhouette of a cyclopean tower that loomed above the world like an unholy spear made out of solidified blood. As soon as Sonny saw it, his heart was gripped by an unexplainable fear. This was the Crimson Spire. The feeling of horror it emanated was enough to make him never wish to gaze at it again. And yet he wasn't able to look away. By his side, Nephis was staring at it too, her thoughts a mystery. There was a tense, dark expression on her face. After a few seconds had passed, Changing Star was finally able to compose herself and turned away. Looking in the direction of the castle, she frowned and said, Nephis said, "The final stretch of the way to the citadel might be extremely dangerous. We must not hurry. Let's find a way down first." Neither Nephis nor Sonny wanted to climb down from the wall, because that would leave them with no path of retreat should something terrible happen. Without the need to discuss it, they had decided to explore the nearest tower and see if there was a suitable way to descend from the wall inside of it. They followed the slightly bending wall north, keeping an eye on the ruins below. From time to time, Sonny was able to notice the shapes of creatures moving through the desolate streets of the ancient city. However, nothing seemed to be interested in scaling its tall granite bulwark. For the time being, they were safe. However, he didn't feel safe. Instead, he kept glancing at the distant axis of the Crimson Spire and shivering. That thing was seriously way too ominous. Sonny muttered, "Good thing we will be out of here soon." That was the only thought that kept him from falling into an irrational panic. Their journey through the Forgotten Shore was about to end. They had endured a lot and survived through a lot. At times, he had not even been sure that they were going to make it out of here alive. But now, all their suffering was about to be rewarded. The path to freedom was already in their sight. They just had to overcome this one last hurdle to return home in glory. Soon. They were closing in on one of the mighty towers built into the wall. The structure was round in shape, rising above the main embankment by a good dozen meters. There was a wide wooden gate leading inside the tower, which was broken a long time ago, with only a few splinters remaining on the ancient iron hinges. Behind the doorway, there was nothing but darkness. Sunny felt that the sight of this entrance was a bit creepy. Of course, darkness was nothing to him. And yet… Suddenly, Cassie tugged on his shoulder, forcing Sunny to stop. Both him and Nephis turned to her, their hands outstretched and ready to summon their swords. Sunny asked Cassie what was wrong, his voice alarmed.
"What is it, Cassie?" Sunny asked, alarmed.
In some situations, the blind girl was able to recognize danger before they could. Her keen hearing and sense of smell allowed her to sometimes perceive things that normal humans would not be able to. Now, there was a scowl on Cassie's face. Turning her head slightly, she whispered. Cassie whispered for them to listen. Sunny held his breath and followed her words, straining his hearing to the limit. Soon, he was able to discern a strange sound coming from inside the tower. Chomp, chomp, crunch. Chomp. It sounded like something was being devoured there, flesh and bones being ground by sharp teeth. The nauseating sound of meat being torn and chewed made him grimace. Sunny and Nephis looked at each other, then summoned their swords. Like usual, before the two of them moved forward, Sunny sent his shadow to investigate the potential enemy. The shadow glided on the stones, quickly approaching the tower. Then, it dove into the darkness and concealed itself in the vast shade that permeated the structure. Sunny was able to see inside. The first thing he saw was several dead monsters lying on the stone in puddles of blood. The bloody trails left on the stone floor suggested that their massive bodies were dragged here by something very powerful. They were cut apart and eviscerated as though dressed down by an enthusiastic butcher. Then he saw a large pile of gnawed bones lying on the stones. Some of them still had pieces of meat stuck to them, while others were split apart and emptied of even the marrow. The next thing he saw was a fire burning in a circle of stone shards, with several skewers of monster meat roasting above it. Next to the fire, the source of the chomping and crunching sounds was sitting on the stones, munching on a well-roasted rib. It was a human. In fact, it was a young woman. She seemed to be only slightly older than the three of them. Sunny blinked. The young woman was tall and attractive. She had hazel eyes and beautiful brown hair, currently tied in a simple braid. Her build was extremely athletic, with perfectly defined lean muscles rolling under the dewy olive skin with each movement. And there was a lot of skin on display, since she only wore a provocatively short white tunic, augmented with bronze greaves, vambraces, and a cuirass with leather terrages. While Nephis was slender and lithe, this stranger radiated a sense of vitality and vigor. Everything about her was lavish and generous, screaming of strength, potency, and power. The strangest part, however, was that there was an absolutely relaxed, comfortable, and happy expression on her face. In the months spent on the Forgotten Shore, Sunny had never, even for a second, allowed himself to lower his guard completely. Neither had Nephis or Cassie. Even in the rare moments of rest, sheltered in reliable safety, they were always slightly tense, expecting all kinds of horrors to fall on them in an onslaught of teeth, poison, and claws. Even while under the hex of the Soul Devourer, there was always an invisible shadow in their hearts. However, the young woman seemed to be completely content with being in this cursed place. In fact, she looked happier than Sunny had ever been, even in the real world. As Sunny watched, the young woman messily devoured the meat of the unfortunate monster. The juices were flowing down her face and fingers. Done with the meat, she bit on the bone itself. His eyes widened. The adamantine bone of the nightmare creature was easily crushed between her teeth. And closing her eyes in pleasure, the girl proceeded to suck out the marrow, then chew and swallow most of the bone itself. Crunch, crunch, chomp, crunch. Finished with the rib, she threw its remains into the disturbingly sizable pile of bones at her feet, loudly burped with no decorum whatsoever, then immediately stretched her hand out to pick up another piece of monster meat from the fire and sunk her teeth into it. Sunny blinked a couple of times more, then shifted his perspective back and looked at Nephis. Nephis asked, "What did you see?" He lingered for a bit and then said in a hesitant tone. Sunny said, "Well, it's either a very hungry human girl or a very gluttonous demon." Nephis stared at him for a few moments, then turned her head to Cassie and said, "Nephis told them to follow behind her. The three of them cautiously approached the entrance to the tower and lingered there, uncertain of how they should proceed. In their minds, there were two outcomes to this unexpected situation. One, the mysterious young woman would turn out to be a local awakened. In that case, all their problems were going to be solved. If an awakened happened to meet a group of sleepers in the wild reaches of the dream realm, it was customary to guide them to the nearest human citadel. Of course, exceptions happened, but in general, awakened strive to take care of sleepers. In this alien land, humans had to band together. It was not only a moral obligation, but also in their own best interest. 2. The stranger would turn out to be a nightmare creature. In that case, they were going to have a tough fight on their hands. Since the rank and class of the enemy were unknown, it was impossible to predict the result. They just had to risk it. Drawing a deep breath, Sunny followed Nephis into the cool darkness of the tower. Immediately, the appetizing smell of roasting meat hit his nostrils. His stomach growled. Sunny cursed under his breath. Before Sunny could react, a piece of bone flew past his head and hit the wall with enough force to shatter into tiny pieces. Belatedly, he raised the midnight shard and assumed a defensive stance, but it was a little too late. The young woman had already been alerted of their presence. Raising her head, she bared her teeth in a wide grin and murmured, Effie murmured, "Is someone hiding in the shadows? Why don't you come out to play?" Her voice was deep, smoky, and had a raspy huskiness to it. But what mattered the most was that she was speaking in the human language. She was human. Probably. The stranger was still sitting in a relaxed pose, but Sunny didn't miss the subtle tension in her carved muscles. He had no doubt that the alleged awakened could explode into a whirlwind of violence at any moment. It was better not to provoke her. Glancing at Neph, he followed her example and dismissed his sword. Then, the three of them hesitantly stepped into the circle of light cast by the bonfire. The young woman looked at them in surprise and raised her eyebrows. Effie remarked that they were humans, which was unexpected. Then she smiled and shook her head. Effie asked where her manners were. With that, she lightly rose to her feet. The white fabric of her tunic shifted slightly, revealing even more of her toned, powerful thighs. Sunny blinked. He had assumed that the stranger was tall, but only now did he realize how imposing her true height was. The woman stood considerably taller than even Nephis, not to mention Sunny himself. Complete with her robust physique, olive skin, and archaic armor, she looked like an ancient goddess. Craning his neck to look her in the eyes was sort of irritating, though. But Sunny had no choice. If he were to just look straight, his line of sight would land directly on her shapely. The young woman, meanwhile, wiped her dirty face with a forearm and gestured at the fire. Effie offered, "Here, would you like to take a seat?" Despite the polite invitation, they hesitated. After several seconds passed in awkward silence, Nephis finally took a step forward and asked the question that had been tormenting all three of them. With her voice uncharacteristically tense and full of suppressed emotion, she cautiously said, Nephis said, Are you human?" The stranger stared at her with a blank expression, then blinked a couple of times. Effie retorted, "What else would I be? A horse?" With that, she threw her head back and laughed loudly, amused by her own silly joke. Nephis and Sunny glanced at each other, confused as to what to do. Meanwhile, the young woman giggled a few more times and looked at them with sparks of glee dancing in her eyes. Effie said, "Of course I am human. Why are you even asking? Anyway, come sit. My neck is tired from looking down on you." With that, she sat down near the fire and assumed a relaxed pose. Nephis, Sunny, and Cassie finally approached and lowered themselves to the stones, looking at the tall girl with hungry flames burning in their eyes. She looked them over, then frowned a little. Effie asked, "Haven't seen you guys around. Are you new?" Nephis gave her a nod. Nephis replied, "Yes, we have just reached the city." She was trying very hard to act like a normal, well-adjusted person. It seemed that her endless attempts to improve her social skills had not been in vain. If Sunny didn't know how awkward and clumsy Neff's natural state was, he wouldn't have suspected anything. The young woman grinned. Effie said, "In that case, my condolence. Wait, You guys survived for 2 whole months in the labyrinth." She whistled and looked at them with newfound respect. Effie said, "That's a real feat. Congratulations." Nephis lingered for a few seconds, then said, Nephis said, "I'm Nephis, and these are my companions, Kasha and Sunless. We are sleepers who came here during the winter solstice." The young woman gave them a wide, friendly smile. Effie said, "Nice to meet you. I'm Effie. Well, at least that's what people call me. I'm also a sleeper." Sunny frowned. So the beautiful giantess was not an awakened, just a sleeper like them. Strangely, he didn't remember ever seeing her in the academy. Still, too impatient to remain silent, he leaned forward and said, Sunny asked, "Are you from the castle? There are people living there, right?" Effie glanced at him. In her eyes there was a hint of a strange emotion. It almost looked like pity. Effie replied, "There are indeed people living in the castle, yes." Nephis and Sunny exchanged excited looks. Then Changing Star cautiously asked. Nephis asked, "Can you take us there?" Effie shrugged. Effie asked, "Sure, no problem. Do you guys have shards?" Sunny blinked. What did soul shards have to do with any this? They had retrieved 2 from that weird stone he had killed at the base of the wall. Was she going to ask for payment? Nephis retrieved the soul shards and showed them to the tall girl. Nephis told her they had 2. Effie sighed. Effie said, "Only 2? Well, it's better than nothing, I guess. Keep them. You'll need them later." Not quite understanding the meaning of her words, Changing Star lingered, then said uncertainly. Nephis said, "We were hoping to reach the citadel and access the gateway as soon as possible. How long will it take?" The young woman stared at them for a long time, and then suddenly bent over in a fit of hysterical laughter. She laughed so long and hard that tears soon appeared in the corners of her eyes. Unpleasantly surprised, the 3 sleepers stared at her in shock. None of them understood the reason for this bizarre behavior. Sunny muttered, "Is she insane?" Sunny frowned, reevaluating the situation. Previously, the local girl just seemed to be a bit eccentric, but maybe there was more to it. Effie's laughter stopped as abruptly as it had started. Wiping her tears, she shook her head and said in a strange tone, Effie said, "Sorry guys, I just couldn't help myself. Please forgive my lack of manners." Then she straightened her back, looked them heavily into the eyes and said, Effie said, "I can take you to the castle, but there is no gateway there. In fact, there's no way out of this cursed hell at all. I've been stuck here for 3 years myself already. So, welcome to the dark city, I guess. Abandon hope all ye who enter here and all that." Shell-shocked by her words, the 3 of them stared at the young woman with pale faces. Sunny felt something brittle and precious shattering in his heart, piercing it with an almost physical feeling of pain. Sunny whispered, "No, no, it can't be. It just couldn't be true. How could all of this have been for nothing? How could all of his hopes, dreams and desires just be destroyed with a couple of words? How was it possible?" Somewhere beside him, Cassie suddenly said in a tiny voice. Cassie asked, "What do you mean there is no gateway?" Effie shrugged. Effie said, "It's very simple, really. I'm sorry to be the one to break it to you, but deep down inside you must have known already. Didn't you? The Forgotten Shore. It's not really a place where humans are supposed to survive. That's why you have never heard of anything like it in the school or the academy." Sunny's face got contorted with anger. Of course, the answer was always within his grasp. He was just too naive and foolish to grasp it. The dream realm was vast and strange, with most of its regions barely explored by humans. However, there was at least a small amount of information available about them. Some were even fully under human control, with large citadels like Bastion providing shelter to hundreds of thousands of awakened. And yet, when he had first come to the Forgotten Shore, Sunny didn't recognize any of the unique characteristics of this place. At the time, he had thought that his patchy education was to blame. He should have realized the truth when neither Nephis nor Cassie managed to succeed where he had failed. Why would a region as unique as this one be utterly unknown? The most logical explanation would be that no one had ever returned from this deadly abyss to the real world to tell others about it. What a fool he was. Just a few weeks in the comfortable life in the academy, and he had completely forgotten that the world never played fair against people like him. The truth was always worse than his worst expectations, so why would this time be any different? The world was a predator that always waited for an opportunity to devour you. Why would he even expect anything else? A familiar bitter taste appeared in his mouth. Meanwhile, Effie continued in a gentle tone. Effie said, 15 years ago or so, a group of powerful and desperate sleepers managed to reach this city and claim the castle for themselves. Not because it had a gateway, but because it was the only place that could keep them safe, at least for a while. Ever since then, a few lucky or resourceful people would find their way to the castle each solstice, only to get stuck here with the rest of us. Nephis was sitting quietly with only her clenched fists betraying the storm of emotions raging in her heart. Cassie was taking the news harder than both of them, though, after all, it was her vision that led them into this trap. Her face was deathly pale, with an expression of pain and shock contorting its delicate lines. Closing her eyes, she whispered. Cassie whispered, "But that is not fair." Effie looked at her with pity. Then she chuckled, smiled darkly, and said, Effie said, "When was anything ever fair?" She was right, of course. Justice didn't really exist outside of the ethereal realm of human imagination. Sonny had learned that lesson a long, long time ago. While he was stewing in his indignant despair, Effie's smile suddenly lost its grim undertone and turned into a happy grin once again. Leaning forward a little, she said, Effie said, "But it's not all bad. At least you have met me. You guys are incredibly lucky, really. If you hadn't run into a local, you would have been dead already." Nephis stared at her and asked in a flat tone. Nephis asked, "Yeah, why is that?" Her awkward manner of speech was back again in all its glory. Effie sighed. Effie said, "The Dark City is simultaneously the safest place to be on the Forgotten Shore, and also the deadliest. It is safe because no sea monster can cross the wall, let alone reach the castle. But at the same time, it is far more dangerous than the labyrinth because almost every nightmare creature here is of the fallen rank." Sonny blinked, feeling a cold shiver permeate his whole body. Fallen creatures. Fallen creatures were immeasurably more powerful than awakened ones. Dormant humans like them had no business fighting against the latter, let alone the former. One awakened demon was already more than they could handle without resorting to summoning a true terror from the depths of the cursed sea. Something much more powerful than the carapace demon would simply wipe them out from existence in a matter of seconds. Remembering countless shapes moving through the ruins, he couldn't help but tremble. Was each of those shapes a fallen monster? How would anyone survive even a day in this cursed city? They would have to be insane to even try. Slowly, the magnitude of the perilous trap they had found themselves in began to seep into his mind. Effie smiled. Effie said, "But you guys managed to stumble into me before descending from the wall. Otherwise, the fallen ones would have been feasting on your souls already. Lucky, very lucky. There are very few people in the castle who go out hunting in the ruins, let alone venture so far away from it. Meeting an experienced hunter like me was probably your only chance to avoid finding out about the true face of the Dark City a second too late." She shook her head. Effie said, "That's like 1 to 1,000, 10,000, a million. At any rate, the odds were really not in your favor. Fortune is definitely in love with at least one of you guys, so cheer up. Do you want some meat? I had a truly amazing hunt today. It was so amazing that I don't even mind sharing." Nephis didn't even look at the roasting meat and instead leaned forward, her words filled with intensity. Nephis asked, "If there is no gateway here, why didn't you try to leave?" Effie blinked a couple of times and looked at her with sincere confusion. Effie asked, "Leave? And go where?" The meat was about to become burnt, so she leaned to the fire and removed the skewers, then replaced them with a couple of new ones. Then, with a sigh, she turned to Changing Star and said, Effie said, You've been to the labyrinth, so you know what it's like. There's nothing else but that damn coral and cursed sea for months of travel in every direction. You can't go on foot, you can't swim. You can't even fly because there are swarms of dreadful flying abominations hiding in the clouds. But try to leave. Yeah, many have tried. They're all dead now. Actually, that's how the initial master of the castle had perished. Sunny gritted his teeth. Sunny demanded, "So what? You guys just hide in the castle and wait for death." The beautiful young woman laughed. Effie laughed. "Of course not, doofus." Then she pierced him with an unexpectedly grim look of her hazel eyes and said, Effie said, "Most of us can't even get into the castle. The king demands his tax, you know. So we just wait for death outside." Sunny stared at her, trying to understand the meaning behind the strange words. Sunny asked, "What do you mean?" Effie shrugged. Effie said, "The castle belongs to a man named Gunlaug. If you want to enter and live in the safety of the castle walls, protected and provided for by his hunters, you need to pay a tribute, 1 shard each week." Of course there was exploitation going on even in this pit of despair. What else did he expect? As long as there were people, someone was going to end up as prey. Sunny sensed a familiar dark feeling rising up from the depths of his soul. At some point, he had lulled it into a slumber and forgotten it, but now it finally returned to its rightful place. A corner of his mouth curled up. Sunny asked, "What happens if you can't pay the tribute?" The huntress glanced at him with confusion. Effie said, "What do you think? You are not allowed to step anywhere near the gates. There's a small settlement for us unfortunate wretches beneath the castle walls, where we make do with what little we have and tremble in the night, hoping that nothing comes out of the darkness to devour us. That's pretty much it." He hesitated. Sunny asked, "But how are people even supposed to get soul shards in this cursed place?" Effie gestured to the corpses of the monsters she had slain. Effie said, "By hunting. One can find awakened creatures here and there in the city. The trick is to find and kill them without stumbling into something far more deadly. Gunlaug's people form parties and go out to hunt, with experienced Pathfinders leading the way. They bring back food, memories, materials, and shards. Nothing stops people from attempting the same." She fell silent for a few moments, and then said in a darker tone, Effie said, "Of course, without good memories, vast amounts of accumulated soul essence and intricate knowledge of the city, those people usually don't live long. Most of them either die or turn to other ways of earning shards. There's very few independent hunters with more than a couple of successful hunts to their names. Ones that are still alive, I mean." Sunny glanced at the dead monsters, each of them large enough to give him pause. Sunny asked, "What about you? How many did you survive?" Effie smiled. Effie replied, "More than a couple." With a chuckle, she raised her hand and began folding fingers. A thoughtful expression on her face, Effie counted, "Let's see, 1, 2, 5. Running out of fingers on one hand, she scratched her head and said with a bit of uncertainty, Effie said, "I'm not really sure, but it should be around 100 or 2. Yeah." Sunny's eyes widened. 200. If what Effie had said was true, then she was a force to be reckoned with. Slaying even one awakened creature was worthy of respect. Slaying hundreds of them, however, was nothing short of remarkable, perhaps even heroic, and a little fearsome, especially since she had hunted them alone in the middle of a cursed ruin full of fallen abominations, unaided, with no one to rely on except for herself. The easygoing huntress was not as simple as she appeared. He frowned. Sunny said, "If this is true, then you should have had no problem paying the tribute to stay in the castle. This doesn't make sense. Why haven't you?" Effie shrugged with ambivalence. The topic didn't seem to interest her. Effie said, "Let's just say that I don't like the ambience there." Sunny wanted to learn more, but suddenly, Nephis spoke again, her voice strangely tense. Nephis asked, "You said that there were other ways of earning soul shards. What are they?" The huntress turned to her and was silent for a while, a hint of some dark emotion in her eyes. However, it was quickly erased by her usual laid-back smile. Effie said, "Well, there's a few ways. If you have a useful utility ability, you can become a craftsman or an artifacts in the castle. There's not a lot of such sleepers, so they are well regarded and cared for. If not, there are other opportunities too. Boys can become Gunlaug soldiers, while girls can enter his harem. Pretty ones like the two of you especially. No one will force you, of course. Nephis scowled. Sunny could see white sparks dancing in her eyes. Nephis said, "So, you can either become his soldier, his servant, his plaything, or die. But that is your own choice. No one is forcing anyone to do anything. Of course." Effie grinned. Effie said, "Smart girl, you get it." Changing Star looked down, her indifferent face turning hard and cold. Her fists were clenched so hard that they seemed bloodless. Nephis asked, "So why hasn't anyone killed him yet?" The huntress laughed. Effie said, "Kill Gunlaug? Oh, many have tried. Great people, terrible people, and everyone in between. You can see their skulls above the castle gate actually." She shook her head. Effie said, "I like your train of thought, princess, but you should forget it. Just consider him to be immortal. He practically is. Believe me when I say that no sleeper can defeat Gunlaug ever. It's simply impossible." Effie sighed. Effie said, "Plus, no matter how much I hate the bastard, he is the only thing that holds this place together. Despicable as he is, without him, we would have all been dead already." Sunny watched Nephis, waiting to see her reaction. What he saw did not make him happy at all. On her beautiful ivory face, there was nothing but cold indifference and resolve. It was the same expression he had seen on it before the battle with the Carapace Centurion first, and the Carapace Demon later. Without even needing Cassie's pathetic ability, he could easily imagine what was going on in her head. Sunny muttered, "This is going to become a problem." As though sensing the same thing, Effie grimaced. Effie said, "No, seriously. Trying to go against Gunlaug will only get you killed. If you're lucky. Don't even think about that. Thinking too much is not good for your health here in the Dark City anyway." Then she smiled and gestured to the fire. Effie said, "Just have some of this delicious meat instead. Life is good when your stomach is full, right? Let me tell you, this is most likely your last chance to eat anything for free. Food is a real rarity in these parts. Can you believe it?" Sunny sighed, then leaned forward and picked up a sizzling piece of meat. No matter what happened, they had to keep going, one step at a time. This was the only way to survive. Sunny said, "Of course I can believe it. I'm from the outskirts, you know. I didn't even know what real meat smells like before entering the academy." With that, he handed the piece of meat to Cassie, took another one and began devouring it greedily. Nephis lingered for a bit, but then followed his example. Effie giggled. Effie said, "That's the spirit. See, Doofus gets it." It seemed as though Changing Star had listened to her advice. At least on the surface, she had accepted that defeating the current master of the castle was impossible. But Sunny knew that, deep down inside, she remained unconvinced. After all, Nephis was in the habit of making impossible things happen. After the shocking revelation about the cruel futility of their long and arduous journey to the Dark City, the desire to reach the promised castle that kept the three of them going for so long had diminished significantly. However, they still wanted to get there as soon as possible. There was a tiny remnant of hope still burning in Sunny's heart. Perhaps Effie was lying to them, or wrong about everything, somehow. He didn't really believe it, though. The beautiful huntress seemed sincere and competent, if a little eccentric. More than that, her words made too much sense. But Effie wasn't in a rush to leave the granite tower. Effie said, "There's not enough daylight left to traverse that much distance. Moving through the ruins is a slow ordeal. Get comfortable and rest. We'll leave tomorrow at dawn." After that, she got busy dressing down the monster carcasses with a long knife that appeared in her hand. She even summoned a memory that looked like a leather apron to avoid getting blood on her tunic. Whistling an upbeat melody under her nose, the vigorous young woman looked like an enthusiastic gourmet chef. Nephis, Sunny, and Cassie were in no mood to talk. Each of them sat somberly by themselves, trying to digest the awful reality of their new situation. Sunny was utterly disheartened. He felt as though someone had pulled the batteries out of his body, leaving him with no strength or desire to do anything. The world had become dim and tiresome. Sunny muttered, "That's hope for you." He didn't even have enough motivation to get angry. It was as though he had run an exhausting marathon and crossed the finish line, only to find out that there was another race waiting for him on the other side. In fact, he would have to keep running forever. He would never meet Master Jet and Teacher Julius again to thank them for the advice and teachings that had helped him survive and maybe even repay their kindness. He would never become an awakened and learn more mysteries of his strange aspect. Most importantly, his dreams of becoming rich and spending the rest of his life in comfort were also not meant to be, which hurt the most. Sunny grumbled that it figured. Crestfallen, he made an effort to find some semblance of solace in this disastrous fiasco. Sunny ventured, "Well, if you think about it, I'm still alive. That has to be worth something, right?" His shadow glanced at him, not entirely convinced. Sunny added, "Plus, I can easily stay alive for the foreseeable future. Yeah, the big picture changed for the worst, but our immediate situation has actually improved a lot. We are safe from the constant threat of drowning or being devoured by the dwellers of the deep dark sea. We have also found a strong community of humans." No matter how things were run in the castle, there were hundreds of people living there. Numbers and experience meant everything in the dream realm. By becoming a part of a human collective, they were going to shed most of the burdens that had been silently crushing them all this time. Compared to the infernal gauntlet of the labyrinth, life in the castle was going to be like a dream. If they were willing to submit to its thug of a master, of course. If Sunny was alone, he probably would. Now, however. But even if they were to refuse, there was still the outer settlement. Effie seemed to be doing just fine as an independent hunter. She didn't even seem miserable. Sunny mused, in fact, she might just be the most contented person I've ever seen. Seriously, how can she be so laid back and cheerful? Is she insane? He cast a sidelong glance at the unreasonably tall huntress and frowned. Sunny said, "Well, let's ponder about it. She has a roof over her head and a limitless supply of delicious food, provided that she hunts it down herself. That is already better than my life in the outskirts." Come to think about it, remaining in the dark city for the rest of his life was not how he had envisioned his future, but it was not that different from struggling to survive in the slums of the real world. Actually, in a lot of senses, it was way better. So, maybe, the situation seemed to be so bad not because it actually was, but because it simply didn't fit his inflated expectations. Perhaps Effie didn't expect anything from life at all. And that's why she was so damn happy and lively even in the middle of this odious hell. Sunny conceded, "Yeah, that must be it. Problem solved. Easy." The shadow shook its head and turned away. Sunny sighed. Despite his somewhat rational attempt to find the bright side in this calamity, he didn't feel any better at all. In fact, thinking about how inescapable and bleak their future was only made him more tired. Suddenly, his skin crawled. The familiar sensation of dread and unease flooded his mind, only now it was so much more profound and invasive. The shadow of the Crimson Spire had fallen on the dark city. Soon. The sound of waves crashing against stone informed them of the coming of night. Not in the mood to even stand up, Sunny silently sent his shadow to take a look outside. As the last rays of the falling sun colored the world in the shades of red, the cursed sea was surging out of the great crater. Sunny watched as the distant statue of the beautiful faceless woman was slowly drowned by the darkness, until only her open hand remained above the waves. Then he shifted his gaze and looked down. The undulating black surface of the cursed sea stopped mere meters beneath the edge of the granite wall. It seemed as though he could almost touch it with his hand. On the other side of the stone barrier, the ruined city lay submerged in shadows, dozens of meters below the water level. Trapped between the endless expanse of the dark sea and the vast emptiness of the ruins, the mighty wall seemed to be as thin as a sheet of paper. And yet, it silently withstood the crushing pressure of the black waves, serving as a dam that protected the city below from being erased by the terrible flood, just like it did for thousands of years. However, Sunny couldn't help but imagine all that crushing weight bursting through the collapsing wall in an all-consuming torrent of darkness. He felt shivers running down his spine. Commanding his shadow to return, Sunny finally forced himself to stand up and walked over to Nephis. Changing Star was sitting with her back against the wall, a dark expression on her face. Hearing his footsteps, she raised her eyes. Sunny sat down beside her, lingered for a while, and then said, Sunny asked, "What do you think?" She was silent for a long time, simply looking at him with an inexorable expression. Just when he was about to think that there would be no answer, Neph finally spoke. As she did, white sparks ignited in the depths of her cold gray eyes. Nephis said, "We will find a way to return. No matter what has to be done, we will." Her words echoed inside the granite tower, making shadows on the walls dance in sinister glee. In the morning, they set out for the castle. Before leaving the safe haven of the granite tower, Effie gave them a list of instructions.
Follow behind me, listen to everything I say, don't make any noise, don't bleed, don't think too much. Some of the creatures out there can hear noisy thoughts, others can sense strong emotions, so don't feel fear either.
Sunny stared at her with a grim expression. How was he supposed to control what he feels? The vigorous huntress grinned.
What, you never tried to solve math equations in your head to impress a lovely lady? Just do the same.
As Sunny's cheeks began to turn bright red, she giggled and turned to Cassie and Neph.
Correction, the two of you try not to feel fear. Doofus, you try not to get too excited. If walking behind me turns out to be too much, ask to get slapped, all right.
Sunny scowled and uttered through gritted teeth,
That won't be a problem.
Effie blinked a couple of times, then smiled.
Playing for the other team? I see.
What was that supposed to mean? Trying to get his emotions under control, Sunny took a deep breath and counted to 10.
Math equations my ass, who does she think she is? Wait, why am I counting?
Making sure that they understood her instructions, the huntress turned around and rolled the massive slab of granite that blocked the exit from the tower to the side. Lean muscles tensed and moved under her olive skin, making for a picturesque view. Sunny stared at her back and gulped. That slab of granite had to weigh a couple of tons at least. How strong was the beautiful giantess, exactly? Catching a glimpse of his stare, Effie raised an eyebrow and winked.
Like what you see.
He answered on autopilot.
Yes, wait, no, I mean that's not why I was looking. How are you that strong?
She glanced at the granite slab, then at him.
Oh, that's my aspect ability. It's a strong all-around physical enhancement.
That was a very rare and powerful ability to have. While not as flashy as many others, it was practically the ultimate warrior ability. With not only her strength but also her speed, agility, endurance, and resilience boosted, Effie was like one of those ancient heroes Neph sometimes talked about, especially since that boost seemed to be so extravagant. Plus, she had most likely absorbed a very large amount of soul essence over the years of hunting monsters in the Dark City. All those shards the recalcitrant huntress refused to pay as tribute to the tyrannical lord of the castle had to go somewhere. But why would she just admit what her ability was? Sharing secrets like that was not a wise thing to do, especially not in the ruthless reality of the Forgotten Shore. Noticing his surprise, Effie grinned.
It's not like it's a great mystery. Around here, anyone with a pair of eyes knows what my ability can do. Do you want me to tell you what my flaw is as well?
There was a mischievous glint in her eyes.
Yeah, right, as if anyone is insane enough to share there.
It's very simple. My aspect not only enhances all my physical attributes, it also does the same with all my physical needs. Why do you think I ate enough meat to create a literal pile of gnawed bones for the fun of it?
She laughed and shook her head.
Well, it was fun, not gonna lie.
So the price for having the strength of many men was to have the hunger of many men as well. Out here in the dark city, where food was scarce and hard to come by, it was a dangerous flaw to possess. It was a curse that could force a person to hunt more, and therefore risk injury and death more than anyone else would have to. Most people would scoff at its severity, but not Sonny. He knew what hunger, real hunger, felt like, what it could do to a person. Perhaps that was the reason why Effie was out here in the first place. Perhaps she had become a huntress not because she wanted to, but because she simply didn't have a choice.
What other physical needs do people have? Sonny thought, a little confused. Air, then water and food, then,
Hey, I said not to get excited.
Sonny flinched and looked up at Effie, who was staring at him and cackling. Embarrassed, he gritted his teeth in anger.
Don't flatter yourself, beanpole.
However, when he noticed that Nephis and Cassie were observing them with amusement clearly written on their faces, his anger somewhat subsided. Belatedly, Sonny realized that, perhaps, the experienced huntress had been joking around with him not just out of pure mischief. Perhaps she was trying to lighten the mood to get them into the right mental state, thus making traversing the cursed city less perilous. Meanwhile, Effie grinned.
What? No answer.
Sonny glared at her and said,
Don't distract me.
Then he forcefully changed the flow of his thoughts and reluctantly added,
I'm solving equations.
A minute later, they left the granite tower and stepped onto the streets of the dark city. Effie had summoned the helmet of her archaic armor before venturing forth. It was of the Corinthian design with a tall crest of blue horsehair and a narrow visor that left only her eyes and lips exposed. On her back, there was a leather bag containing the meat, bones, and hides of the monsters she had slain during the hunt. Sonny knew for a fact that this bag was much larger on the inside than it seemed from the outside. Otherwise, in order to accommodate all of F's trophies, it would have had to be comically big. However, it still weighed way too much for an ordinary person to carry. Including the armor, the long knife, and the black leather apron, it was the fourth memory he had seen the huntress summon. He wondered how many more did she have in her arsenal. He had yet to see what weapons Effie used. In the ghostly light of early dawn, they entered the cursed ruins. The mournful ruins of the once great city sprawled around them like a desolate stone maze, with gray skies above and nothing but dead silence surrounding the cohort of 4 tent sleepers. It seemed as though they were walking through a vast, cyclopean graveyard. Sonny had to constantly remind himself that there were countless horrors hiding in the ominous shadows of the dark city. One wrong turn could land them in dire peril. In this ancient ruin, they had no choice but to entrust their lives to the hands of their guide. Luckily, the guide in question was not a morose dead poet, but a tall, extremely attractive young woman clad in a pleasantly revealing archaic armor. In their current circumstances, Sonny much preferred the company of a warrior to that of a useless scribbler. In fact, circumstances had nothing to do with it. He was having trouble imagining any situation where a writer would be helpful to have around. From what he knew, all writers were lazy, talentless hacks whose only real skill was finagling money out of honest people while getting off on torturing them with sadistic cliffhangers. Not to mention that none of them had a backside like Effie. Wait, what? Getting his mind out of the gutter, Sonny frowned and reminded himself to keep his emotions in check. In a sense, this harsh necessity was a blessing. The perilous reality of the ruined city prevented them from concentrating on the bitter despair that had taken a stranglehold on their hearts after the grim revelation of the previous day. They just had to put one foot in front of the other and not think too much about anything, one step at a time. That was how he was going to survive. With a heavy sigh, Sonny glanced around and continued walking. Just like Effie had said, traversing the ruins turned out to be a slow ordeal. The huntress led them through the complex maze of wide and narrow streets, following a strange, convoluted path that only she knew. Often, they would have to stop and hide, waiting for some unseen danger to pass. Sometimes they walked under the empty sky. Sometimes they dove into the weathered buildings and spent some time crawling through the piles of rubble inside. Other times, Effie was able to lead them straight through half-collapsed houses to emerge into secluded alleyways on the other side. Once or twice, they had even climbed to the rooftops and proceeded forward by walking on precariously rickety tiles or bared support beams, jumping across vast chasms and balancing on half-rotten planks of wood that had been placed there by someone to bridge especially wide gaps. During these moments, either Neph or Sunny would carry Cassie in their arms. Sunny was surprised to discover that the interiors of some buildings were incredibly well preserved. It was as though the inhabitants had just left a few days ago, as opposed to the thousands of years that had passed in reality. Because of that, he was able to catch glimpses of how the citizens of this ancient city had lived all that time ago. It was a strange and eerie sight. He was also able to clearly understand that Effie indeed knew the ruins very well, everywhere they went. There were signs of her previous visits and preparations. From the planks placed across the gaps between roofs to the heavy slabs of stone used to hide improvised passages, it was apparent that she had spent years of meticulous effort turning large parts of this lethal maze into her own private hunting grounds. He had gained a new respect for the seemingly carefree young woman. She almost made traveling through the cursed ruins look safe and easy. However, he knew that this couldn't be farther from the truth. In fact, he suspected that death was constantly breathing down their necks, only barely held at bay by Effie's knowledge and timely judgment. Several freshly eviscerated carcasses that they had stumbled on served as a clear sign that Dark City was teeming with harrowing life. Even terrifying nightmare creatures were not safe here. More than once, they heard the distant sounds of claws scraping against stone, sensed the ground trembling under heavy footsteps, or noticed swift shadows falling through the clouds. In those moments, Effie would change their course on the fly or find a perfectly concealed hiding spot without fail. Meeting her had indeed been a rare stroke of luck, but with each hour that passed, Sunny grew increasingly somber. No matter what kind of future awaited them in this cursed place, he had no doubt that they would have to hunt for food as well. That meant that he was going to have to learn all the same things that Effie had learned, and maybe even more. The task seemed incredibly daunting. He wasn't even sure that he would be able to accomplish it. At least he wasn't going to do it by himself. There was Changing Star to partner with and Cassie. Their presence calmed him down, living in this terrible hell alone. He didn't even want to think about it. Such a wretched existence would surely kill him, and if not, at least drive him insane. At that point, he wouldn't wish to be alive anyway. Who would want to endure that kind of misery?
Why think about something that is never going to happen?
Glancing at Nephis and Cassie, Sunny hid a smile and hurried to catch up to Effie. Come to think about it, he had it way better than the recalcitrant huntress. There were reliable allies with whom he had forged bonds of trust and companionship at his side. The three of them made each other stronger. More than that, his own aspect was able to provide him with a similar comprehensive physical enhancement ability, albeit a lesser version of it. It was much more versatile, though, allowing him to transfer the enhancement effect onto memories and inanimate objects, not to mention his invaluable ability to move and scout around without being seen. Sunny would offer the services of his shadow to Effie, but he wasn't sure about how safe that would be. If there were creatures in these ruins capable of sensing thoughts and emotions, what were the chances that some of them would be able to sense the gaze of the shadow as well? He would have to learn more and experiment before allowing it to wander around on its own. These thoughts had cheered him up a little. Soon, as the sun began to fall toward the horizon, they had finally reached the base of the hill on which stood the magnificent castle. Sunny looked up, sensing his heart beating wildly. A heavy and anxious feeling took hold of his mind. Depending on what happened next, their fates were going to change forever, either for the better or for the worse. In the center of the cursed city, a tall hill towered above the ruins. At its base, an arch made of pristine white marble stood amidst the devastation. It was unscathed and spotless, as though protected from the entropic touch of the all-consuming darkness by some sublime force. Beyond the arch, a wide road paved with white stones scaled the hill. Sunny looked up as they passed beneath the arch, trying to imagine crowds of festively dressed people doing the same in the distant past. It was hard and a little heartbreaking thinking about how the ancient city must have looked before the mysterious calamity. Not turning her head, Effie said in a wistful tone.
There are areas in the ruins that many nightmare creatures tend to avoid for some reason. The castle is one of these places. I was told that back when the original group of sleepers came here hoping to carve a foothold in the city, there was only a single spire messenger nesting in the throne room with no other monsters around. Those madmen actually managed to kill it.
Nephis gave her a glance.
Spire messenger.
The huntress chuckled.
Big ugly bastards with black feathers and pale bodies. You must have seen them hunting in the labyrinth. They come from the spire.
Changing Star hesitated.
What are their rank and class?
Effie shivered a little.
Fallen beasts, that's why I said that those guys were a little mad, but they were a powerful bunch.
She grew silent and then added in a quiet voice.
It must have taken a lot to kill them in the end.
Brought into a solemn mood by that last statement, they continued forward in silence. The stone road coiled around the hill, slowly climbing its sheer slopes. Here and there, it was broken by long stretches of stairs and formidable, but strangely graceful fortifications. No one was standing guard, though. The whole road was empty. Sunny gestured to one of the stone barricades and asked,
Why are there no watchmen?
Effie shrugged.
Gunlaug has barely enough people to man the castle walls. They will notice anything that approaches the hill, though. The whole city is in clear view from up there, and there are different protective measures put in place. They have already spotted us, too.
Sunny shifted his body a little, not enjoying the feeling of being watched by some unseen, potentially dangerous strangers. After a long time walking up the coiling road of white stone, they finally reached the zenith of the hill and saw the mighty castle in all its glory. Up close, it looked even more magnificent. Built from the same pristine marble as the arch at the base of the hill, it stretched into the sky like a white mountain made by human hands. The frontmost tower was wide and imposing, with a tall decorated gate and a grandiose staircase leading down from it to a vast stone platform that the road ended with. On both sides of the frontmost tower, brought slightly forth, two others stood as bastions, connected to it with arched aerial bridges and accompanied by smaller companion towers of their own. Behind them, the main keep soared even higher, as though trying to challenge the menacing crimson spire that loomed above the world far in the distance. Smaller towers, spires, and wings stood here and there, forming a complex and strangely harmonious formation. The whole structure was incredibly beautiful, striking, and at the same time radiated a feeling of unassailable firmness. It was as though the castle was built for gods, not mortals. The only thing that spoiled the picture were dozens of human skulls hanging above the gates on rusty chains. Sunny grimaced, brought down to grim reality by this ghastly sight. His gaze fell lower, only now noticing dozens of crude, makeshift hovels huddled on the stone platform. They were built from fragments of rubble, rotting wood and pieces of monster hides, chaotically clinging to the stones as if afraid to be blown away by the wind. An unpleasant, strangely familiar smell hit him in the nose a few moments later. It was the motley but unmistakable stench of the slums. That stench was nothing like the poisonous reek of the outskirts, and at the same time exactly the same. Sunny couldn't help but smile crookedly.
Geez, I'm home.
Between the hovels, gaunt and empty-eyed people were busy eking out their pitiful existences. They were dressed in a strange mix of dirty rags and shiny memories, with those wearing armor standing out among the rest like rare oddities. Most of them were extremely young, barely older than Sunny himself. He could smell their exhaustion and desperation even from where he was standing. Sunny really wanted to laugh. After everything he had been through ever since becoming infected by the nightmare spell. The cycle had finally completed. He was right back to where he had started, only much worse off. Wasn't that the funniest thing ever? If this wasn't fate, then he didn't know what was. Oh, the irony. Changing Star's voice tore him away from his reverie.
Sunny, are you okay?
He blinked a couple of times, then slowly turned to face her and said after a brief pause,
Yeah, I was just reminiscing.
Something in his voice must have sounded strange, because she gave him a long look before turning away with a short nod.
Good, don't relax just yet.
Then she turned to Effie and asked.
What do we do now?
The huntress looked around and shrugged.
It's going to get dark soon, so I would advise you to find a shelter before that. Look around for an empty hut. With how many people die each season, there's always plenty of those. Otherwise, 2 of you can pay the tribute and go into the castle, but the 3rd one will have to stay.
Changing Star lingered, then said.
What about you?
Effie grinned.
What about me? That luxury 1-bedroom cottage over there is mine. Mind you, it was built from the best kind of crap you can find here, although it's still crap. Anyway, I am going home, preparing myself a hearty supper and then going to sleep. I'm dead tired from these last couple of days. Sorry, I don't host guests.
Nephis stared at her, obviously wanting to say more, but then simply nodded.
I see. Thank you for everything you have done for us. I won't forget it.
Effie smiled, patted her on the shoulder and turned to Sunny and Cassie.
Bye, doofus. Doll, see you around.
With that, she began whistling a cheerful melody and walked away. The 3 of them were suddenly left alone, lost and unsure about what to do. The inhabitants of the outer settlement didn't pay them a lot of attention, only occasionally throwing an indifferent glance at the 3 young strangers. Only Cassie's beauty attracted a couple of intense, darkly fascinated gazes. After a minute or so passed in disoriented silence, Changing Star hesitantly took out the 2 soul shards that they had collected from the remains of the rolling stone and looked at the glimmering crystals lying in her hand. They had to make a decision. Nephis held the shimmering crystals, looking at them with a heavy expression. Sunny was also staring at the shards, his head full of dark thoughts. The remnants of shattered souls glowed softly in the dim twilight of dusk. Around them, the inhabitants of the outer settlement were hurrying to get inside their pitiful hovels before the coming of night. The sun was already hidden behind the cyclopean silhouette of the crimson spire, drowning the world in its eerie shadow. The air was full of fear and worry. He grimaced.
What are you thinking about?
Changing Star sighed and looked up. Her ivory face was harsh and thoughtful. She remained silent for a while, and then said in her usual calm tone,
We need to split up.
Sunny couldn't help but laugh.
You do know what usually happens when people split up in these kinds of situations, right?
She stared at him with no humor in her cold, gray eyes.
This is not a drama, Sunny. We have the means to provide 2 of us with food and shelter for a week. There's no reason to pass on this opportunity.
Cassie turned to her, a confused expression on her face.
But what about the 3rd?
An uncomfortable silence hung between them, broken only by the whistling wind. Sunny looked at the blind girl, then at Nephis, and finally glanced at himself. Which one of them was going to remain hungry in the bitter cold, while the other 2 would be eating their fill in the comfortable safety of the castle? He thought that he had an inkling.
What else did I expect?
It was less than 10 minutes since they reached the human civilization. Well, whatever passed for one in this loathsome purgatory. And the tentative connection that had been established between them in the crucible of the labyrinth was already coming apart at the seams. Just as he had expected, the nature of their relationship was going to change now that they weren't essentially the last 3 people in the whole wide world, with no one else to rely on but each other. Was it strong enough to endure without that desperate need? He wasn't sure. Throughout his whole life, Sunny had never managed to last long in any group. He didn't know if this time was going to be any different. Just as his insecurity threatened to break out of control, Nephis sighed and handed him the soul shards.
Here, take Cassie inside.
He stared at her hand, then looked up sharply. A strange storm of emotions erupted in his heart. There was surprise, joy, concern. but at the same time, irrationally, a dark sense of shame and resentment. Not knowing how to deal with all these feelings, he scowled and asked.
Why me?
Changing Star simply raised an eyebrow. Shaking his head, Sunny offered her a crooked smile and added,
Don't get me wrong, I'm not refusing. I'm just curious, why are you so kind all of a sudden? Is it out of some misguided sense of nobility?
Nephis looked at him for a while, and then said with indifference,
I have never been noble. I have never been kind.
He blinked, struggling with the desire to pinch Neph and make sure that she was awake. Had she met herself? If she wasn't noble, then who was? Meanwhile, Changing Star shrugged and looked away.
It is simply the best choice. Right now, we need information the most. With the help of the shadow, you will be able to learn much more about what is going on in the castle than I ever would. While you are gathering information inside, I will do the same here. We will meet in a week, share our findings, and decide what to do next.
Sunny just stared at her. Did Neph just reveal herself to be as cynically pragmatical as he was? Once again, he felt a weird mix of emotions. He was simultaneously elated and hurt by her lack of sentiment. However, the fact that she simply assumed that they were going to continue working together as though it was a given had not avoided his attention. For some reason, this small detail gave Sunny a warm feeling. Nephis looked at him and added,
Besides, the terms of our trade have come to an end. Your promise was to give up on your share of spoils on the way to the castle. Well, here we are. That stone creature was your kill, so these shards are yours by right.
Trade? What trade?
Oh yeah, the trade he had made with Changing Star to get her to teach him swordsmanship and hide the fact that he had no way to absorb soul shards. He has almost forgotten about it, but she didn't. Now that Sunny had been reminded of its existence and realized that it was over, he felt a sudden pang of regret. It was as though one of the few strings that connected them together had been suddenly severed. With a sigh, he took the soul shards from her hand and gripped them tightly.
All right, then I'll meet you in a week, I guess.
Sunny opened his mouth, wishing to say something else, but then just turned away. Stepping aside, he gave the girls some privacy to say their goodbyes. Soon, Cassie's delicate hand found his shoulder. Sunny glanced at the blind girl, remained silent for a bit, and then asked,
Are you ready?
She hesitated before answering. When she did, there was a hint of sadness in her voice.
Oh, yes.
With that, they walked away and left Nephis behind, standing alone in the surging darkness of the descending night. Guiding the blind girl, Sunny approached the grand stairs that led to the ornate gates of the magnificent marble castle. Out here, there was nothing but the howling of the wind and the encroaching veil of darkness. It seemed as though the dwellers of the slum were not allowed to build their hovels on the wide stretch of stone that separated the marble steps from the outer settlement.
Be careful, there are steps ahead.
After warning Cassie, he sensed a cold feeling grasp his heart. For some reason, it felt as though once he stepped on these stairs, there would be no way back. Gritting his teeth, Sunny took a step forward and began his ascent to the castle. Soon, they approached the apex and stopped in front of a couple of unfriendly guards. Both of the young men barring their way wore armor-type memories and wielded their weapons in the open as though trying to warn anyone approaching to not test their patience. They looked at Sunny without even trying to hide their disdain.
What do you want, Red?
Sunny hesitated, then held out the soul shards. One of the guards glanced at them and grinned.
Well, would you look at that? The rat has brought us a present.
Chuckling, he took the glimmering crystals and waved a hand.
Come on in, someone will meet you inside.
Struggling to not glare at the armed sleepers with murder in his eyes, Sunny forced out a pale smile and cautiously walked past them. Then, looking up at the dozens of human skulls swinging above them on rusty chains, he sighed darkly and led Cassie through the gates of the castle. As they passed through the ornate gates, a large hall opened up before them. Hearing a strange rustle from above, Sunny raised his head and saw tall windows with stained glass panes soaring to the distant ceiling. During the day, the hall must have been filled with cascading rays of beautiful light. Currently, though, several young women were nimbly moving from one window to another, draping them with thick sheets of crude fabric. The makeshift wooden ladders they used creaked and cracked, creating a strange and almost melodic sound. It seemed as though the sheets of fabric were being fastened in a way that prevented even the smallest glint of light from escaping the castle during the night. Sunny suspected that every window in the marble fortress was currently being covered in the same way. Just as this thought appeared in his mind, a loud noise thundered behind their backs. Turning around, he saw the ornate gates closing. The two guards who had met them outside were already sliding a heavy iron bolt into the sockets, their faces red from strain. The massive bar must have weighed more than the two of them combined. The castle was now sealed from the outside world, ready to face the onslaught of cursed darkness. Suddenly, Sunny felt like an animal caught in a cage. Trying to calm himself down, he looked around and noticed an opulent wooden desk that looked completely out of place in the grand hall. It must have been dragged here from some other part of the marble citadel. Behind the desk, a gaunt young man with nervous eyes was writing something down on a piece of parchment. The whole thing looked strangely similar to a reception desk in a luxurious hotel, or rather, to what Sunny imagined such a thing would look like. He had never actually been to a hotel, of course. Hesitating for a few moments, he walked over to the desk and addressed the young man.
Hey, we've been told that someone will meet us inside.
The castle receptionist flinched and looked up from his paper, a fearful expression appearing on his face. When he realized who was speaking to him, though the fear disappeared, replaced by a tentative smile. The young man had a thin face and a pale, unhealthy complexion. He looked hungry and weak, much more like those poor souls in the outer settlement than someone who lived in the castle. His clothes, however, were clean and tidy, without any signs of wear and tear like that of the people outside.
Ah, guests, sorry you gave me a fright there. Welcome, welcome to the bright castle. Whoa, you were just in time. A couple of minutes later and the gates would have been closed.
Saying that, he threw a tense glance at the two guards and then quickly looked away.
Anyway, my name is Harper. I'm responsible for guest accommodations today. Let's get you. Oh, I don't seem to recognize you guys. Is this your first time paying the tribute?
Sunny stared at him for a couple of seconds, feeling Cassie squeeze his shoulder a little tighter, then said,
Oh yes.
Harper smiled.
Congratulations. You might not even suspect it, but I was once in your shoes myself. In fact, it was just a few months ago. But ever since Lord Gunlaug graced me with his kindness, I've been living in the safety of the castle. You'll love it here too, I'm sure.
Right.
So, what do we need to do now?
Harper picked up his quill and opened a large ledger.
That's very simple, really. I'll just need your names to mark when the two of you paid the tribute, and that's pretty much it. We have a lot of spare rooms here, especially in the Tower of Dusk. It is very quiet, so how about I settle you there?
There was a nervous glint in his eyes.
Tower of Dusk probably means that it's in the western part of the castle, facing the Crimson Spire. No wonder people don't want to live there.
But to Sunny, fewer people meant less danger. He gave the gaunt young man a nod.
Sure, no problem.
Harper smiled.
Great, that's great. So your names.
Sunny interrupted him, trying to avoid dangerous questions.
I'm Sunless, and this is Kasha.
The young man wrote their names down and marked the date of their arrival. Sunny stared at his neat handwriting, his eyes locked on the short strings of numbers. So, it had actually been exactly 77 days since the night they had arrived on the forgotten shore. The three of them had scrupulously kept track of time for a while, but after their harrowing experience with the Soul Devourer, Sunny had lost the grasp on the actual count. Out there in the real world, the spring was already starting. A whole season had passed. It felt like a lifetime. Not paying any attention to the storm raging inside Sunny's heart, Harper closed the ledger and offered them a polite smile.
All done, now leave your worries behind and follow me. Between these walls, you are completely safe. Nothing is going to hurt you.
His tone was jovial, but Sunny didn't miss the quick glance Harper threw at the menacing guards standing silently by the sealed gate. Harper led them through the castle, explaining small details about the rules and customs one had to follow once inside. He was a talkative and friendly guy, so Sunny quickly got the gist of it. In general, it was very simple. They were free to do whatever they wanted unless it broke the basic rules of cohabitation, with a few small caveats. There were areas in the Marble Fortress open to everyone, and areas that only members of Gunlaug's host could enter. Those were marked by the symbol of a serpent coiled around a tall tower. As they walked, Sunny noticed several crude tapestries with that symbol woven on them. The cloth of the tapestries was black, with a stylized white tower and a golden serpent embroidered in their center. He guessed that this represented the Dark City, the Bright Castle, and its lord respectively. Apart from that, there wasn't much to know except for when and where to find food, water, and other necessities. The last thing Harper said was about how they should behave around other inhabitants of the fortress.
People here are very nice, but you still must remember to have manners, especially when you are interacting with the guards and the hunters. These guys protect us and risk their lives to provide for us, so they deserve our respect. If there's a misunderstanding, be mindful of their burdens. Yes.
Sunny threw a dark glance at the gaunt young man and translated that statement to "Don't mess with Gunlaug's people, and if they are messing with you, just swallow it." How wonderful! Meanwhile, he was able to catch a few glimpses of how people actually lived inside the castle. To Sunny's surprise, they didn't seem nearly as put down and miserable as he had expected. In fact, everyone seemed to be more or less fine, going about their business with mundane casualness. Of course, there were signs of worry, stress, and pressure on their faces, but the same could be said about people in the real world. All in all, the inhabitants of the castle looked surprisingly ordinary.
I guess humans can adapt to anything.
And as Changing Star had taught him, adaptability was the greatest strength. As long as there was some semblance of stability, humans would find a way. And it seemed as though the tyrannical master of the ancient fortress, hateful as he was providing the sleepers trapped on the forgotten shore with that stability. Effie's words about how the bastard was the only thing holding this place together echoed in Sunny's mind.
Perhaps he's a necessary evil.
Finally, they reached the westernmost tower of the castle. Indeed, it was mostly empty and quiet. Few people seemed to want to stay here, driven away by the unnerving vision of the Crimson Spire looming in the distance. However, for the two of them, it was perfect. Cassie couldn't see at all, while Sunny was long accustomed to the presence of the spire because of his sensitivity to shadows. Plus, right now, all the windows in the tower were closed, hiding it from sight. Harper suddenly stopped and said in a somewhat embarrassed tone,
"I forgot to ask. Would you guys be needing one room or two?"
Without thinking too much, Sunny and Cassie answered at the same time.
A one.
A two.
Then they froze and turned to each other with petrified expressions. Cassie blushed, while Sunny became even paler. He didn't mean anything untoward by requesting a single room for the two of them. It's just that over the months spent camping together, being close to Cassie in case she needed help with something had become his habit. More importantly, he was unwilling to let her leave his sight even for a second in this unpredictable castle. He didn't trust anyone here. But in these new circumstances, requesting a single room suggested a different meaning. But there wasn't. Clearing his throat, Sunny looked at Harper and said,
2 rooms if they're next to each other. That is not possible, then 1.
The skittish young man scratched the back of his head, and then answered in a somewhat surprised tone.
All right, I think I can find 2 adjacent rooms for you. Follow me."
With that, he began walking forward. Sunny glanced at Cassie, then shook his head and followed behind Harper.
She won't misunderstand, right?
Soon, they were standing in front of two sturdy wooden doors. Harper handed Sunny 2 iron keys and smiled.
Here we are. The rooms are not very big, but they're really cozy. Enjoy your first night of safety, guys. You must have not felt safe in a long time. I know I never did before entering the castle. Thank heavens that time is behind me. Anyway, food will be served 1 hour after sunrise tomorrow in the main hall of the keep. See you there.
With that, he glanced at them one last time, smiled sheepishly, and walked away. Sunny and Cassie were left alone in awkward silence. Still feeling a little embarrassed, Sunny sighed and said,
I hope you didn't think that I was.
Cassie suddenly giggled.
I know, I just didn't expect it. Let me guess, you distrust every single person in this castle, and therefore are going to watch me like a hawk to scare them all away. Like an overprotectively mean, violent big brother. Right.
With a smile, she turned her head this way and another, and then added,
To be honest, I don't feel safe here either, so thank you. Although I must say this place seems almost like a hotel. My parents took me on a mountain vacation once and we stayed at a really old hotel. What was it called? Overgaze? Overlook? Anyway, this place is exactly like that.
Sunny grinned.
Right, I've never been to a hotel, but that was my first thought as well.
Of course, that was, if the hotel in question was populated by hundreds of nightmare spell carriers, with a murderous tyrant for an owner, and not a single police officer around to call for help if something happened.
Oh, funny.
Sunny had spent most of his life scared of the policemen and trying to avoid them at all costs, but now he actually missed them a lot. On the other side of the sturdy door, there was a tiny room with stone walls and a single narrow window that was closed with wooden shutters and draped in thick cloth. Harper had warned them not to open the windows during the night, but out here in the Tower of Dusk, no one would want to stare at the view anyway. Allowing any amount of light to seep out of the castle at night was considered to be a severe crime, so he had been pretty emphatic on that point. Of course. The gaunt young man didn't know that neither Sunny nor Cassie required light to move in the dark. They could open the windows as wide as they wanted. Not that they had any reason to. Inside the room, there was a bed with a straw mattress, a flimsy chest, and a tiny desk. On the desk, there was a basin filled with water, a few strips of clean cloth, and an oil lamp. There was even a small round mirror made of polished bronze. Sunny caught a glimpse of his reflection and flinched, as though seeing a stranger. In these past 2 months, he had seen himself through the eyes of the shadow plenty of times, but it wasn't the same. He had changed a lot. His face was much sharper and angular now, the last remnants of youthful roundness chased away from it by the harsh gauntlet of the labyrinth, although Sunny never had a lot of that to begin with. It was thin and pale, with dark circles under his eyes and other signs of extreme exhaustion. His black hair was longer, falling over his eyes in a dirty mess. What changed the most, however, were the eyes themselves. Deep in their dark depths, there was a glint of calm, heavy, bleak coldness that had not been there before. With a startling realization, Sunny understood that he, too, now possessed the look of a seasoned fighter. The type of calculating coldness hiding in the eyes of such men was known as the murder math in the outskirts. Hero and Nephis had that quality too. Only in their case, it made them seem like true warriors. Sunny, on the other hand. Sunny had the eyes of a killer, and even deeper than that, visible only to him, golden threads of weavers in human legacy glowed mysteriously in the darkness. Staring at his reflection, Sunny grinned darkly and said in a strange, hoarse voice,
Are looking good, Sunless.
Leaving his shadow to guard the door to Cassie's room, Sunny fell on the soft mattress, wrapped himself in a blanket, and tried to get himself to sleep. Here in the safety of the mighty castle, surrounded by hundreds of people, lying on a real bed, it was hard to believe that just a few days ago he was traveling through the cursed darkness of the deadly sea on a rickety boat, fighting terrifying monsters in the bizarre landscape of the coral labyrinth. and losing his mind piece by piece to the gluttonous hunger of an ancient soul-devouring tree. It all seemed like a feverish dream.
Well, this isn't bad.
With that thought, he fell asleep. In the morning, washed and refreshed, he waited for Cassie in the hallway. Even the puppeteer's shroud, which finally got a chance to return to the Soul Sea for a decently long period of time and restore itself, looked clean and tidy once again. That poor armor had gone through enough abuse to kill a dozen sleepers, yet it still held fast, saving his life on numerous occasions. Sunny was reminded of how lucky he had been to receive it. The blind girl did not make him wait for long. Soon, she came out of her room, practically glowing with loveliness and freshness. It seemed as though Cassie had done the same things as Sunny. After months spent crawling through blood and dirt in the wilderness, they finally looked and felt like humans again.
Good morning.
Sunny blinked. He had almost forgotten how stunning Cassie was. With her delicate features, bright blue eyes, and pale blonde hair, she looked like a beautiful porcelain doll. The blind girl had dismissed the enchanted cloak, leaving her dressed only in a light tunic with leather sandals on her feet. She was nothing short of breathtaking. He closed his eyes and sighed.
This smells like trouble.
Good morning, Cassie. She turned her head to him and wrinkled her nose. Sunny frowned.
On what?
The blind girl knitted her brow.
I don't know, you smell different.
He stared at her for a few moments and then laughed.
If this is your way of saying that I used to reek, then thank you, I guess.
Giggling, Cassie came closer and put her hand on his shoulder.
That's not what I meant. Anyway, let's go eat.
The two of them were in a strangely good mood. Sunny guided Cassie to the main keep of the castle, following the route that Harper had explained to them the previous evening. On the way, he was careful to avoid any doors and corridors marked with the symbol of the golden serpent coiled around a white tower. His shadow was going to take a look at the forbidden areas of the fortress later, most likely. But for now, they had to keep a low profile and avoid trouble. Finding the keep was not hard. As many other sleepers were going there to partake in the breakfast too, meals were served twice a day in the castle, once in the morning and once right before sunset. If you missed one and had no other way to procure food, you would have to remain hungry for the rest of the day. Sunny observed the sleepers with curiosity, sometimes describing them to Cassie in a low voice. The inhabitants of the castle were very different from the desperate dwellers of the outer settlement. They generally seemed healthy, or at least well-fed. The amount of armor-type memories here was also much higher, although many still wore clothes made of mundane fabrics. Almost all of them were young and beautiful, with only a couple of the people he had seen looking like they were past their early 20s. Despite that, few could compare to Cassie in terms of looks. Finally, they entered the main hall of the keep, where long wooden tables were placed to accommodate the morning crowd of hungry sleepers. Suddenly, hundreds of eyes turned to stare at Cassie and Sunny. Feeling cold shivers running down his spine, he gulped.
Crap.
The main hall of the mighty castle was grandiose and majestic in appearance. The gentle light of the morning sun was cascading through the tall windows and reflecting from the white marble walls, filling it with a bright radiance. The walls were decorated with intricate carvings that spanned dozens of meters, creating a regal tapestry. At the far end of the hall, a set of stairs led to a dark alcove. The back wall of the alcove had numerous small holes cut through it, and with sunlight shining through them into the deep darkness, it seemed as though a fragment of the starlit night sky was somehow locked within the castle. Beneath that light stood an empty white throne. Sunny stared at the throne for a few moments, then lowered his gaze and glanced at the several hundred people that were looking at them. Long wooden tables were placed along the length of the grand hall, with a motley crowd of sleepers sitting on crude benches behind them, busy consuming their food. There was some sort of hierarchy in how they were grouped, but Sunny couldn't understand it yet. Currently, most of them were staring in his direction. Sunny gulped. It took him a couple of seconds to realize that all these people were not, in fact, looking at him. They were all looking at Cassie, clearly startled by her loveliness.
Crap.
Just as he had thought this smelled like trouble, the blind girl, meanwhile, was oblivious to the commotion her appearance had caused. Sensing the sudden tension in his muscles, she asked,
Sonny, why did you stop?
He narrowed his eyes, gave the crowd of sleepers his most menacing scowl, and answered in a flat tone.
Just taking in the view.
Then Sonny walked over to the young women rationing the food, received 2 plates of steaming monster meat stew, and guided Cassie to a relatively empty spot at the end of one of the tables. He even got 2 cups of something that closely resembled tea. Sitting down, he put the crudely made utensils into Cassie's hand and stared at his plate. He didn't like all this attention one bit.
Look at that, Cass. They even got vegetables. I swear there's at least 2 pieces of a tomato in my stew, or is it a carrot? What's that thing that looks like a red potato?
Sonny had only seen vegetables in the Academy's cafeteria, so he was not well versed in differentiating them. Teacher Julius had also only mentioned them in passing, since the chances of encountering a vegetable from the real world in the dream realm were not very high. To be precise, he had briefly showed Sonny pictures of the most common earth vegetables and said that if he ever was to find something that makes him think that thing looks familiar, he should turn around and run. Cassie smelled her stew and said with a smile,
I think it's a beetroot.
Sonny blinked.
Well, never heard of it.
While they were innocently chatting, he was observing the sleepers through his shadow, waiting tensely for things to go wrong. And pretty soon, they did. Sonny gritted his teeth when 2 rough-looking young men suddenly rose from their benches and headed across the hall toward them with unpleasant excitement burning in their eyes.
Here we go.
Who would have thought that the thing that landed him in trouble would be Cassie's beauty of all things? Usually, it was either his sharp tongue or his general obnoxiousness. Never, not even once, had it been his looks.
Ouch, I shouldn't be jealous, right?
The worst part was that the 2 approaching sleepers were obviously a part of Gunlaug's gang. It was apparent from their armor and the fact that they carried their weapons in actual sheaths like a pair of idiots. Memories could be freely summoned out of thin air, so the only reason to keep them visible at all times was for the sake of intimidation. He had noted that detail after meeting the castle guards yesterday. What had Harper said? If there is a misunderstanding with one of Gunlaug's people, remember that these guys carry a heavy burden. Treat them with respect. In other words, swallow it. The young men approached their corner of the table with vulgar smiles. They were clearly undressing Cassie with their eyes. Sonny turned his head and looked up at them. The sleepers sitting nearby turned away with heavy looks, clearly afraid and uncomfortable.
Maybe they just want to say hi.
Sonny opened his mouth.
Respectful, remember, be respectful.
And said,
What the fuck are you degenerates staring at?
The whole hall was suddenly enveloped in silence. Once again, Sonny had found himself in the center of attention. But this time, everyone was actually staring at him instead of Cassie.
I guess that's better.
The few nearby sleepers who had pretended to not notice anything a few seconds earlier lowered their heads, as though trying to become smaller and disappear completely. Sonny glanced at them with disdain and turned back to the pair of young men who were currently towering above him, a dark and dangerous light dancing in their eyes. To be honest, his incendiary reaction had caught Sonny by surprise. The anger had taken the better of him for a moment, forcing the words out of his mouth. But the damage had already been done. It seemed as though his brotherly instincts were not only still alive, but also somewhat overwhelming.
To hell with this, they want to see dark and dangerous. I'll show them.
He glared at the 2 idiots, knowing that at this point there was no way back. Beside him, Cassie turned her head, an alarmed expression on her face. One of the idiots grinned.
We were just hoping to politely introduce ourselves to this lovely little doll, but hey, we can get acquainted with the ugly little clown first. How about it?
He glanced at the other sleeper, who was looking at Sunny with no humor in his eyes whatsoever. Cassie frowned, then said,
Why are you?
However, at that moment, the second young man took a step forward and growled, interrupting her.
What did you just say, clown? Do you know who we are? Fool, we're Gunlaug's men.
His hand was resting on the pommel of his sword. Sunny knew that escalating the situation was not a wise thing to do, but at this point, he didn't have a choice. Backing down now would only lead to a disaster. He knew this type of people well. The moment they felt a weakness, it was all over. They understood only two things, fear and strength. Outstretching one hand, he scowled, looked the young men right into the eyes and said,
Congratulations, now get lost before I make you dead men.
Perhaps recognizing something in his voice, or maybe in his eyes, the sleeper who had his hand on the pommel of the sword hesitated. For a second, Sunny almost believed that his threat worked. But then the young man furtively glanced around, and this tiny hope evaporated. If they were alone, maybe the sleeper would have reconsidered his desire to antagonize Sunny any further. But with all these people watching, he couldn't show fear. Sunny failed to account for one crucial detail. All bullies were cowards, but what they feared the most was people finding out about their cowardice. Gunlaug's man bared his teeth in a threatening grin.
Those are terribly big words coming from a puny weakling like you. You know what? I think your girl needs to keep better company. Why don't we help her out by making you disappear?
Sunny smiled.
And I guess I'm going to kill a couple of fools today.
Cassie, meanwhile, was not happy with what was happening at all. The frown on her face deepened.
I'll decide what company to keep myself. Now, please.
However, they weren't listening to her. Sunny was already bracing himself for the worst-case scenario, prepared to summon the Midnight Shard at a moment's notice. But then, suddenly, a calm voice sounded from behind his back.
Leave them alone, please. They are my friends.
Caught by surprise, Sunny hurriedly shifted his perspective to the shadow and glanced back. Behind him, a tall and confident young man stood calmly with his hands resting at his hips. He had brown hair and a gentle, handsome face. His eyes sparkled with friendly humor. It was
Castor.
Without a doubt, it was Castor, the only person Sunny had ever seen defeat Nephis in a fight, even if it was just during training. Back at the academy, Castor had been a star of their batch of sleepers. Handsome and friendly, he was not only popular but also respected. And although it pained Sunny to admit it, that wasn't only because of his lofty status of a legacy. Even other legacies looked up to him. Many even considered him to be the true king of the rankings. Speculating that Changing Star had gotten her first place by mistake, Castor was powerful, skilled, and charming. He was also humble and had an amiable personality that made it hard for anyone not to like him. His background was impeccable, and his future was unquestionably bright. Basically, he was the polar opposite of Sunny.
Damn, I knew that voice sounded familiar.
Sunny turned his head and stared at the handsome young man in utter bewilderment. What was that guy doing here? The two sleepers, who didn't even know how close they had come to tasting the sharp edge of the Midnight Shard, were doing the same. There was no more excitement on their faces.
Oh, it's you.
That was my line.
Castor looked at them with a silent smile. There was no apparent hostility in his eyes, but for some reason, Gunlaug's men seemed to lose their desire to stir trouble. After glancing at each other, one of them said in a hesitant tone,
You know this guy, Castor.
He gave them a nod.
Yeah, we were in the academy together. Don't mind his rude behavior, guys. That's just how he is. Rough around the edges, but really nice once you get to know him well.
Since when do we know each other?
Sunny was irrationally angry at that statement, but forced himself to keep his mouth shut. He understood that Castor was just trying to defuse the situation. Actually, his arrival had been very timely. Sonny was sure of his ability to dispatch a couple of thugs, but what would happen next? He doubted that other members of Gunlaug's host would just sit and watch. Becoming involved in a conflict with the masters of the castle on his first day here would have been less than ideal. The thugs in question, meanwhile, had given up. Trying to keep the appearance of being in control, they glared at Castor darkly and backed down.
Teach your friend some manners, Castor. Next time we won't be so lenient.
With that, they turned around and retreated back to their seats, throwing menacing looks at anyone who dared to stare at them. Soon, the grand hall was once again filled with the hum of voices. Castor followed them with his eyes and then turned to Sonny, his smile becoming a little somber.
That wasn't a very smart thing to do, my friend.
Sonny scoffed.
Yeah, well, who says that I'm smart? Wait, no, that didn't come out right.
The tall young man stared at him for a few seconds and then sighed.
In any case, it is very nice to see you, both of you.
With that, he sat down as though somebody had invited him. Well, admittedly, there was some connection between them. Wishing to talk to people with whom you had attended academy was sort of understandable. Still, Sonny didn't like it. Throwing a quick glance at Cassie, he smiled coldly and said,
What, are you very shocked to see us alive?
Castor hesitated.
It is good that you managed to survive.
It seemed that this was his way of admitting that yes, he was surprised, but in a pleasant way. It wasn't a secret that Sonny and Cassie had been seen as two walking corpses by all the other sleepers in the academy. Just like Nephis and Castor occupied the top 2 positions in the rankings, they were dead last. Because of that, the two of them had been shunned and ostracized. Of course, when it came to Sonny, he not only welcomed the cold treatment of his peers, but had actually been the one to engineer it. In any case, no one had wanted to be around them, as though afraid of becoming infected by the invisible aura of death that followed them wherever they went. Sonny himself had been guilty of avoiding Cassie as much as he could in the past. It must have been very strange to see the two of them alive and well after months spent among the horrors of the Forgotten Shore. Cassie smiled.
Thank you.
Castor reciprocated her smile and asked, his tone strangely warm.
You are Kasha, right, and you are sunless.
Sonny gave him a curt nod.
Right, although I'm surprised that you remember our names. Don't think that we've forgotten how you guys used to treat us.
Cassie squeezed his hand and said in a disapproving tone.
Sonny.
Castor chuckled.
No, he's right. We behaved like a bunch of jerks. Looking back, there were a lot of things we did wrong, if only we had known better.
His voice trailed off, and after being silent for some time, the handsome young man suddenly smiled with nostalgia.
But still, those days in the academy were not all bad, right? I still remember the first time I met you sunless. You made quite an impression. All those tall tales, spitting in the faces of awakened tyrants, slaying sword saints with a shake of a finger.
He chuckled, remembering the good old days. Sonny grinned. He was in the mood for some mischief.
What that trivial stuff, child's games, you should have seen the things I've done in the labyrinth. Now that's something to brag about.
Castor looked at him, with humorous sparks dancing in his eyes.
Oh, well, do tell, what else have you done?
Sonny shrugged with profuse indifference.
This and that, let's see.
He pretended to think for a few moments, and then said in a bored tone,
I guess the most incredible thing I've done was killing a great devil with just one strike of my sword. Finished him right off, no problem at all. I even got a memory from that kill. But before you ask, no, I can't show it to you, because, oh right, I ate it.
Castor stared at him for a long time, then suddenly laughed. Even Cassie giggled, entertained by Sonny's earnest delivery. Shaking his head, the handsome young man smiled and said,
I see your sense of humor did not change. Good, that is good. Few people manage to preserve it here.
Sunny blinked a couple of times and said, pretending to be offended,
What do you mean, sense of humor? It's the honest truth.
He received another bout of laughter instead of an answer. There was food, safety, and laughter. He thought suddenly, remembering how Cassie had described the bright castle after dreaming of it for the first time. She had also seen Sunny leading her through its gates. Her prophetic visions were turning out to be frighteningly accurate. Makes you wonder about that other vision she saw. Not allowing himself to become distracted, Sunny chased away the ominous feeling and hid a smile. Then, with a shrug, he scoffed.
Well, don't believe me if you don't want to. That was just one of my many adventures anyway, although the other ones were admittedly less remarkable. You know, the usual stuff, slaying dozens of awakened creatures, being resurrected from the doors of death by a beautiful princess, summoning ancient horrors from the depths of the cursed sea, outsmarting ancient fiends to escape from their clutches, sailing through the abyss on a boat made of demon bones, fighting gargantuan leviathans underwater. And so forth, mundane crap like that.
As he was talking, Cassie gradually stopped laughing and turned to him with a somewhat startled expression on her face. It seemed as though it was only now, with the harrowing journey already behind them, that she had finally realized how outlandish it all actually was. Put together, the facts of their bloody struggle to survive sounded like something out of a fairy tale. But they both knew that all of that had actually happened. It had happened to them. Castor chuckled.
Wow, compared to you, Sunny, my own story sounds kind of lame. I just entered the dream realm near the city wall and spent a few days running away from a bunch of terrifying monsters, then stumbled on a hunting party from the castle, and that's pretty much it.
He sighed.
By the way, when did you guys arrive? I'm sure I haven't seen you around before.
There was no reason to lie, and Sunny couldn't anyway. Looking longingly at his monster stew, which was slowly growing cold, he sighed and said,
We reached the Dark City 2 days ago and entered the castle yesterday at dusk.
The handsome legacy stared at him, then blinked a couple of times.
Wait, what do you mean? Did you guys really spend 2 months in the labyrinth?
Castor let out a quiet oh of realization. Finally, the moment he had been wary of came. Sunny really didn't want for anyone to think that he was some kind of a powerful figure. First of all, there was no better advantage than being underestimated by the enemy. Secondly, he still had to hide the fact that Changing Star had not been the only one to receive a true name in the first nightmare. Luckily, he had long thought of an exceptionally convincing excuse. When in trouble. Blame everything on Nephis. Laughing inwardly, Sunny pretended to shiver and sighed.
Yeah, I don't even want to think about it. That place. It's pure hell, honestly. If it wasn't for Changing Star, both of us would have been long dead.
She wouldn't have survived without his help too, but Castor didn't need to know that. Sunny was pretty sure that mentioning Neph's name anywhere near the names of two losers like Cassie and him were believed to be would make anyone think that she had single-handedly carried the both of them to safety on her back. As it turns out, he was right. As soon as he mentioned Nephis, something changed on Castor's face, with a strange look in his eyes. The handsome man leaned forward a little and asked, in a deceptively calm tone,
Changing, Lady Nephis is alive. She is here.
He had already forgotten all about how unlikely it was for someone like Sunny to survive a long journey through the deadly nightmare of the labyrinth. Sunny narrowed his eyes slightly. Castor's reaction was a little bit more intense than he had anticipated. It was on the border of being weird. But then again, the tall and handsome legacy had seemed to be strangely enamored with Nephis even back at the academy. You bastard. Enraged for some unknown reason, Sunny gritted his teeth and said,
Yeah, she's around.
Turning her head slightly in his direction, Cassie hesitated for a moment and then added,
We only had 2 soul shards when we came to the castle, so she is staying in the outer settlement, for now.
Castor leaned back, a hint of disappointment appearing on his face for a fraction of a second. Then, he inhaled deeply and said,
I see, I see.
Sonny took a sip of his tea and asked,
Why are you so interested in Nephis all of a sudden?
The handsome young man looked at him with surprise.
What? Oh, I'm just glad to know that more of us survived.
Then he sighed and shook his head.
From what I was able to learn, there were no more than 7 sleepers sent to the Forgotten Shore by the spell this year. Up until today, I thought that I was the only one to survive. It's good. It's good to know that I was wrong.
Castor's face grew solemn.
If Lady Nephis was with you, that explains how you have managed to reach the Bright Castle alive. But the other 3, I'm afraid that they are long dead. May their souls rest in peace.
Sonny and Cassie lowered their heads, coming to terms with this new information. It was true that they had not been treated well by the rest of the sleepers in the academy. Still, it was also somewhat heartbreaking to know that several of the kids they had known, even if it was just for a short amount of time, were now gone, killed by the vicious crucible of the dream realm. The cruel and ruthless nightmare spell had taken its first victims. Who would be next? Without having to look at each other, they quietly repeated Castor's words.
May their souls rest in peace.
Some time passed in silence, with each of them thinking about what their own fates would be in this cursed place. Finally, Sonny extricates himself from this dark reverie and asked,
So you've been here all this time. How are you able to afford to live in the castle? Don't tell me that you have joined this Golden Serpent's army.
Castor sighed.
No, I didn't. Although I'm going to lie if I say that I haven't been tempted to. One way or the other, all roads here lead to Gunlaug and his men. I don't think there's more than a handful of powerful sleepers who have managed to remain independent. Currently, I'm one of them.
Sonny stared at him or repeated his question.
How so?
The handsome young man shrugged.
My aspect ability gives me a certain advantage when it comes to escaping the clutches of the nightmare creatures. Not so much with killing them, though. I went on a few hunting expeditions with other independent hunters, but that was a mistake. We barely escaped alive. Still, it landed me a few soul shards. The rest I got from selling a couple of memories.
Right unlike them normal people, the proud legacy had entered the dream realm with an entire arsenal of memories that his clan had prepared for him. He had also started with a somewhat considerable amount of soul essence already absorbed, although it wouldn't have been too much. Unlike memories, which could be brought back to the real world by anyone, actual soul shards were physical objects, and as such, only masters and saints were able to transport them. Because they traveled between realms physically, and not just in spirit like sleepers and awakened, that meant that even rich legacy clans couldn't afford to feed too much soul essence to their scions in advance. Masters were a rare breed, after all, let alone saints. In any case, Castor had it better than anyone else on the Forgotten Shore. His ancestral memories were enough to buy him months, perhaps even years of a tranquil life in the castle. He could use this time to learn the ins and outs of the Dark City to become an independent hunter or reconsider his position and join Gunlaug's host eventually. Even in this hell, his background gave him an enormous advantage. Lucky bastard. But that still didn't explain why those thugs were so unwilling to get on his bad side. Sonny frowned.
Why were Gunlaug's men afraid of you?
Castor looked at him with irony.
Those 2, oh right, you have just arrived at the castle. Well, basically there are different kinds of people serving Gunlaug. The guys you have so carelessly offended are members of the castle guard. They are at the bottom of the totem pole. They are also the weakest and have little to no real battle experience. What minor reputation I have is enough to make them think twice before messing with me.
For a second, there was a dangerous gleam in his eyes. Because of Castor's amiable personality, when talking to him, it was easy to forget what the word legacy really meant. Legacies were trained to fight and kill since they could barely walk. Every one of them was a true powerhouse. Sonny had no doubt that Castor's actual reputation in the castle was not as negligible as he would have them believe. After all, he was the only human. No, actually, the only being Sunny knew of that had managed to defeat Nephis in combat. And in terms of personal power, Nephis was as high as one could get in Sunny's heart. No one else could even compare. He was also sure that Castor's reputation was earned by spilling blood. I really hope that I won't have to face this guy in battle one day, Sunny thought, feeling a cold sensation that he desperately hoped was not a premonition. With a sigh, he tried to hide this unease and asked,
"So I shouldn't be worried about their retaliation?"
The amiable young man gave him a nod.
The two guards you have humiliated might try to do something on their own, but there won't be any reaction from the host itself. But I doubt that they will. Just don't antagonize them any further.
He suddenly grew serious. Sunny bristled inwardly, wanting to snap back, but then closed his mouth. Yeah, he really did have a temperament that attracted trouble, guilty as charged. While he was reconsidering his life choices, Cassie suddenly spoke in a quiet voice. Sunny bristled inwardly, wanting to snap back, but then closed his mouth. Yeah, he really did have a temperament that attracted trouble, guilty as charged. While he was reconsidering his life choices, Cassie suddenly spoke in a quiet voice.
Castor, is there really no way out of here?
The proud legacy looked at her and remained silent for a long time, a somber expression finding its way to his face. His eyes were heavy and bleak. After a while, he sighed and said,
None that any of us can ever hope to reach Kasha. As it is right now, this is where we have to live. Maybe something will change in the future. But for now, just take care of yourself and try to survive.
Standing up, he glanced at them one last time and smiled.
It was so nice to see you guys, really. I'll leave you to your food now if that's okay. If you need anything in the future, don't hesitate to come find me. My quarters are in the Tower of Dawn.
Quarters? Of course that miscreant has quarters. With that, Castor left, letting Sunny finally get to his stew, which was barely warm by that point. Great! Breakfast is ruined. He thought angrily, drilling 2 holes in the tall sleeper's back. His fault. It's all his fault, not mine. Yeah, definitely. Sometime later, Sunny was lying on his bed with his eyes closed. The Tower of Dusk was calm and quiet. It was time to send his shadow on a walk. Other the next 5 days, Sunny mostly stayed in his room while his shadow stealthily prowled around the castle, spying on people and learning their secrets. Slowly, he began to understand the undercurrents that flowed beneath the seemingly peaceful surface of life in this pristine white fortress. Of course, in reality, things weren't peaceful at all, and as far from pure as one could imagine. But that was to be expected from a place where hundreds of lost youths lived with no hope of ever finding their way back home, away from all the restraints of civilization. He wasn't surprised at all. If anything, it was strange to see some semblance of law and order, no matter how detestable and revolting, persevere despite all the obstacles that stood in the way. Somehow, the inhabitants of the castle were able to coexist with each other in a fragile balance. The system was cleverly built in a way that allowed the abused to dream of a better life and restrained the abusers from going too far. Better life meant winning Gunlaug's favor, while going too far meant losing it and being banished into the cold darkness of the outer settlement. Both fear and hope were created and firmly grasped by the Bright Lord. Their mere existence kept people in their places. Sunny suspected that the same dynamic, just substituted for a different kind of reality, reigned in the slum outside of the castle walls. The outer settlement seemed to exist separate from the castle, but in fact both were simply parts of one large ecosystem. People on the outside longed to be allowed inside, while people on the inside dreaded being exiled to the outside. Because the possibility of a better life, or a worse one, existed, they were distracted from the fact that, no matter what happened, they would still be spinning in a circle, like a serpent biting its own tail. The Bright Castle and the outer settlement created a closed cycle of exploitation and abuse that, paradoxically, kept everyone in the Dark City sane and alive. It was nothing short of ingenious. Of course, Sunny wanted no part of it. He didn't know how many people were currently surviving in the slum, but there were somewhere around 500 sleepers living in the ancient stronghold. However, not all of them shared the same status. There was a complex hierarchy in place, separating people into different castes. Some of these groups had a distinct place in the hierarchy, while others were less clearly defined. Most of the inhabitants of the castle, unsurprisingly, were directly serving Gunlaug. They were guards, hunters, pathfinders, artisans, and handmaidens. Ruling over them were 5 lieutenants who answered directly to the Lord himself, each responsible for their own aspect of the day-to-day life of the fortress. The castle guard was the largest of these groups, consisting of around 150 men. They were in charge of guarding the stronghold and enforcing Gunlaug's laws. Just like Castor had said, they were near the bottom of the totem pole in terms of power and status. Anyone with a remotely useful aspect ability could join the guard, and although their training was rather rigorous, actual opportunities to experience combat were few and far between. That was not to say that their job was not dangerous. Every time a stray nightmare creature climbed the hill or attacked from above, it was their duty to either kill or chase the monster away. And out here in the Dark City, no monster was anything less than terrifying and absolutely deadly. The castle guard was led by a morose giant of a man named Cassie, who was one of Gunlaug's most trusted lieutenants and perhaps the oldest sleeper on the Forgotten Shore. He was just 2 years short of 30. Cassie was a ferocious fighter and ruthless commander, holding his subordinates in an iron grip. Above the castle guard, there were hunters. These were the elites of Gunlaug's forces, each possessing a powerful combat aspect, rich battle experience, and sharp wit to make use of both. There were around 50 of them, divided into 7 hunting parties. Each morning, as soon as the gates of the castle opened, one of the parties left the safety of the impregnable marble walls and ventured into the harrowing maze of the Dark City to hunt and kill awakened creatures. It was thanks to their efforts that people in the ancient stronghold had food on their plates. Without them, none of this would have been possible. Hunters were recruited from the ranks of guards, and becoming a hunter was a dream come true. That was because these professionals enjoyed plentiful rewards from the Lord, such as living in a room of their own as opposed to cramped barracks, better food and access to various luxury items, best memories and tools the bright castle could provide, as well as many other things. Of course, the other side of the coin was that their lives were often the shortest. Despite all their experience and preparations, many never returned from the hunts, and the only reason any did at all was the Pathfinders. Pathfinders served as guides for the hunting parties, just as Effie had said. The secret to surviving in the Dark City was to find and kill comparatively weaker creatures without stumbling into something far more deadly. They made sure to do just that, track the awakened monsters without leading the pack of hunters into the jaws of fallen abominations. There were so few Pathfinders that Sunny even questioned whether they could be categorized as a group. In the whole castle, there were less than a dozen. Each of them was a seasoned veteran who earned his role through surviving long years of bloody battles in the ruins, and thus had a chance to live long enough to learn large areas of the Dark City like his own 5 fingers. Needless to say, all of them were incredibly fearsome combatants and enjoyed lavish, sometimes even decadent lifestyles. Both hunters and pathfinders were led by a charismatic man called Gemma. Gemma came to the Forgotten Shore in the same year as Gunlaug, and had helped him take control of the castle. Together, these 3 groups, guards, hunters, and pathfinders, formed Gunlaug's army, which was simply known as the Host.